Hey, mine's on. Jackie. Jackie,
I know.
we're working.
They're working.
Oh, they work.
Julie. Yes, we're live.
Okay, we do have the microphones working, so we can get started. I'm going to look at the back of the room, and once he gives me the thumbs up, we can start the video. So we are on. Okay, wonderful. Welcome to the Oregon Transportation Commission meeting for Thursday, July 18th. All the energy in the room apparently shut down the electronics here. Want to take a brief moment and welcome our interim deputy director, Mr. Paul Mather. He will seem very familiar to a number of you. He has spent over 3 decades with the Department of Transportation. We have invited him back to lead us through this time of change and transition, and couldn't be more honored to have him at the helm. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will tell you, I've been to probably 300 commission meetings, and this is the first time on this side of the table. So watching Matt do this for many a times, it's not as easy as it looks. I can tell you that. Anyway, so director's report, or in this case, deputy director's report. I have 3 things I'd like to share with the commission. First is from our motor carrier division. In our continued partnership with the Federal Motor Carrier Service Administration, the Oregon Motor Carrier Transportation Division was recently recognized as a contributing state within the Performance and Registration Information System Management Program, otherwise known as PRISM. The Federal Motor Carrier Service Administration conducted a review of motor carriers' electronic data records to evaluate PRISM compliance and determine that motor carrier is now a participating member in the PRISM program. The PRISM program is a key component to the efforts to reduce the number of commercial motor vehicle crashes, injuries, and fatalities. PRISM provides states a safety mechanism to identify and immobilize motor carriers with serious safety deficiencies and hold them accountable through registration and law enforcement sanctions by the issuance of federal out-of-service orders. The acknowledgement from the Federal Motor Carrier Service Administration reinforces a strong partnership between the 2 programs and recognizes motor carriers' ongoing commitment to vehicle and driver safety. The second item I have is just an acknowledgement of our communications staff. The ODOT Communications Section videographer staff has taken home gold, silver, and bronze in a recent National Videographer Award. Our train video, titled Worth the Wait, won gold. It highlights the danger of distraction and bad behavior around trains. Our construction and utilities career day video from Region 5 won silver. Our bronze was a safe routes to school video from Coos Bay that Rod Stevens and Gary Leeming worked on, so congratulations to our communications staff. The last item is a little celebration of ODOT's birthday. In July 1 of 1969, the Oregon Department of Transportation was born. The Department of Motor Vehicles and the State Highway Department, including state parks, the State Board of Aeronautics, State Ports Commission, and the newly created Mass Transit Division came together to form the Oregon Department of Transportation. John Fulton served as the department's first director. Part of Director Fulton's interim report to the governor states, there is a pressing need for a structured means for better coordination of multimodal and interagency transportation planning and programming. Coordinated statewide goals must be defined so they relate to the goals of economic development, natural resources, education, health, recreation, and other society and environmental activities. Some pretty familiar thoughts and words that we still work on today. So happy birthday to ODOT.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I believe that we next have the recognition of the 2019 Glenn Jackson Scholarship recipient. And shall we?
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. Nehemiah and your family, would you come up? I'm going to give you just an introduction to the program, and then we'll
Go ahead and
sit at the table there if you would like, but it's a chance to recognize our 2019 Jackson Scholar recipient. The Jackson Scholar Program was established in 1985. It is named for the late Glenn L. Jackson. For 20 years, Jackson served on the Highway and Transportation Commission, most of the time as chairman. He had a positive and lasting influence on both state parks and the transportation system in Oregon. Contributions to the scholarship include the Oregon Department of Transportation and Oregon State Parks employees. No state funds were used in establishment of the scholarship fund. College-bound high school seniors who are dependents of ODOT or state parks employees may apply for the Glenn Jackson Scholarship. Applicants are evaluated on their academic record, leadership qualities, moral character, community and school activities, and financial needs. And this year's, as I mentioned, this year's recipient is Nehemiah Donovan. I actually had the pleasure of working with his father, Sam Donovan, in Region 3 of my time down there. And Sam is a fun colleague to work with a lot of energy. And I can see, looking through Nehemiah's list of accomplishments here, I can see that his dad, Sam, must be very proud of him. So I'm going to read through just a little bit of some of Nehemiah's accomplishments. They live just outside of Roseburg, up the North Umpqua River in Glide. Nehemiah recently graduated from Glide High School with a 4.0 GPA. Nehemiah has always been very active in school and community activities. He's been involved with Future Farmers of America and held numerous officer positions, this year being the Glide Charter President. He has been actively involved in 2 Douglas County 4-H groups where he has held multiple officer positions, including presidents of both clubs. He has been an active member in National Honor Society since his sophomore year. Through the NHS program, he has organized 2 successful blood drives, earning recognition for his school in USA Today as a Red Cross winter superhero. He was a junior class president and has been part of the associated student body throughout high school, while he has also been playing high school baseball. In addition, Nehemiah spends time helping his family on their small farm and has held a part-time job on a ranch in the Glide area for the past 3 years. Nehemiah will be attending Oregon State University. Go Beavs. He will be majoring in biohealth science and plans to pursue a career as a physician's assistant. Congratulations.
Sorry, if you have any comments or anything, maybe what the award means to you would be wonderful. If you feel so inclined, go ahead and hit the button. You have to be pretty aggressive. There you go. Yes, wonderful.
I just like to say thank you. It's an honor to be the recipient of this scholarship, and I'm really pleased to have received it.
Excellent. Well,
Good.
Congratulations. It's well earned. I think now we have a photo op with you and your family, if you don't mind.
All right, good.
Right, okay. Coming around, okay.
Sorry, I was gonna say, which way are they going?
No, I think you're going.
Are they going there? Okay. I was-
Which way is, oh, he's.
Yeah, what was-
Congratulations. Okay.
Perfect.
The next item on the agenda is public comment. And I have 2 individuals who have signed up. I'd like to invite Commissioner Nyquist, and then I also have Sergio Garmino, sorry. Wonderful. So Roger will put you here, and Sergio, if you want to come up here, then that way we can have, wonderful to see you. Sorry about that. And do be aggressive on the button. and the floor is yours. Please state your name for the record and, not yet. There you are. Yes.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity. For the record, my name is Roger Nyquist. I'm Chair of the Lynn County Board of Commissioners. I'm before you today on behalf of the Lynn Economic Development Group. I've delivered what I would describe as a rebuttal to the Tioga report that you received yesterday, dated the 17th. I'm not going to go into the contents of that. You can read that for yourself. There's quite a vigorous conversation going on about whether or not a intermodal reload facility in the Mid-Valley would work, whether it would cash flow, whether it brings value to the taxpayers. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to participate in those conversations. From our perspective, we've put a great team together. We hope that you will approve us today and would look forward to the next step and further developing those plans and getting this thing done, if you will. But I take the time I have left to just take a step back and talk about the public policy of an intermodal facility in the Mid-Valley and whether or not it makes sense and whether or not it's a good investment. I would submit to you that it does. It would be the glue between trucking and rail in the Mid-Valley. It's connectivity. It's all the things that we at the local level and you as the state government have strived for in the last 15 years with Connect Oregon and partnerships and working together and doing things more efficiently. And I just think strategically, long-term, it's a great investment. Don't get me wrong. I hope you choose us. But even if you were not to choose us, I would be advocating for this investment of tax dollars to create this infrastructure facility that will serve Oregonians for a long time to come. Thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Gamino, please go ahead and give the button a good push. State your name for.
Madam Chair, thank you. Sergio Gamino, for the record. I'm the General Manager of Coos County Area Transit down in Coos County. And I come before you today to humbly ask you to consider changing a recommendation from ODOT staff and the PTAC on two of our projects from the stiff discretionary projects that we submitted. One of those, the Lifeline project, is a project from North Bend to Roseburg. We have been operating that as a project funded through ODVA that we received last year. And we have had immense number of public requests to ride that, but because it's not available to the public right now, only to veterans, we have had to deny the requests. So there's a need right now. The recommendation from ODOT staff right now is that we conduct a feasibility study before we enact that public service. Our contention is that no other organization was asked to do a feasibility study before their project was approved, to include our own Coastal Connection project that was fully funded with no caveats. And then the third project that we submitted for was for a growing up project. We're going through a transition right now. We are still a component of the county, and we're getting ready. The county commissioners just enacted an action to transition us from a county component to a transportation district, fully independent transportation district. That, as you know, costs dollars. We're doing that at a recommendation, again, from ODOT. We had a technical assistance visit last year where a consultant, a transportation consultant, came down along with some ODOT staff and said, hey, the way you're arranged now doesn't make sense. And it's not very efficient and beneficial to public service. So you either need to the county staff, either get more involved or set up your own transportation district. So the commissioners decided to set up their own transportation district. But with funds being as they are, so tight, we don't have the available funds to be able to pay for that ourselves. So we asked through this stiff discretionary mechanism to be able to fund that transition. The election alone is going to cost upwards of $60,000. We don't have $60,000 just laying around to pay for the election. We were only asking for $100,000 for that project. And with that, I conclude my remarks.
Questions of either? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
both for coming.
And I have one other individual, and if anyone else would like to make public comment, please just let me know. Ms. Robles, would you please join us? Go ahead and hit the button so that we can hear you. State your name for the record, and wonderful to see you again.
Hi, my name is Roberta Robles. I'm going to be a future mom at Harriet Tubman, so I've been tracking congestion issues on I-5 for a very long time now. My comments are specifically to bring to your attention that since the last time we met, CTRAN and WashDOT just entered into an intergovernmental agreement to look at a bus rapid transit facility between Vancouver 122nd and the CRC Bridge. And so equally, I want ODOT to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with TriMet to study and another facility to match their facility to downtown Portland, so we can start pursuing a fixed rapid transit facility along the I-5 corridor to connect with our neighbors to the north to reduce the traffic near Harriet Tubman Middle School. I therefore conclude that there has been a significant change of scope with the I-5 Rose Quarter Freeway projects, and I think we need to kick it back to ODOT for an EIS and a connection path forward to what Vancouver is already doing. So with that said, I have two other issues that I wanted to bring to your attention based on this morning's meeting. And one of the issues that I had from that meeting was when we talked about the management systems processes within ODOT. I don't believe these people are reporting accurately that their systems are functioning accurately. What we found during the Rose Quarter Freeway project was that their traffic models are not accurate. They are not consistent with regional models, and they are being run by consultants who don't really quite understand all of the pieces that are happening at the regional level. So if you know what's happening at the regional level, they are going after the Metro 2020 bonding plan for a Southwest corridor and other funding needs. Now, the problem with what we said about Metro jumping through hoops to get the Southwest corridor down I-5 is because it's a bad alignment decision that was based on regional politics. So if we are trying to put a new rail corridor down the Southwest, we should be using the rail corridor we already have, the one we already own, and one that's not going to stuff up South I-5 with parking garages right next to the freeway on-ramps. That's what all of the money is for at Metro, is for a brand new line, brand new right-of-way, brand new displacement people, businesses, for a poor alignment decision to protect Lake Oswego. So, with that said, the way to wrap up all of those plans we heard about this morning is to align them on how we are going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Each one of those plans needs to have goals that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, not improve it or increase it. So if you only have 1% of the funding going to walking and cycling, and you expect the mode shift to go to 40-50% mode shift, walking and cycling, well, you need to match the funding with your expectations. So we have solutions, and the Portland Regional Transportation Community has been excluding me for many years, including the recently canceled Portland Freight Committee meeting, where I requested to talk about that with them, and they would rather cancel their meetings than talk to me. And I did the work in Vancouver.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that you were there this morning. I think part of that conversation is we're looking at how we plan and how we intersect all of those plans together to get to those goals. And so we look forward to doing that alongside you and the rest of the public. Do we have anyone else that would like to address the commission? Okay, so we will go on to our next agenda item. And I do realize that we are running a little bit behind this afternoon rather, but we will get through everything. We just might be spending a little bit more time together today than you maybe had anticipated. So the next item is the review of the director search status. And Vice Chair Van Brockland, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to remind everyone, we are in the middle of or at some point in the process of identifying the next director for the department. As you all know, long-standing Director Matt Garrett left the post at the end of June. He notified us in January of his intent to do so, and we have been in a search process since early this year. That process included hiring hiring a national level consultant, Korn Ferry, out of Washington, D.C., to lead the search, and we have been working with them over the last few months. We are now at the candidate identification stage of the process, and Korn Ferry has been working on assembling a pool of candidates for us to begin to look at. We have a search committee, which I'm chairing, Chair Bainey sits on, and the Governor's Transportation Policy Advisor, Brendan Finn, is also a member, and the three of us have been meeting regularly as this process has continued. Korn Ferry did outreach efforts to more than 200 transportation contacts that they have in their national network. They have actually screened more than 40 candidates, and we are now looking at a group of 9 that we will be interviewing next week. Subsequent to that, we will be reducing that number to a group of finalists, and we will be interviewing them in August. The full commission will be interviewing them in August with the goal of identifying the next director sometime in late August, we hope, or soon thereafter. So that's the status report on where we are, and certainly take any questions from the members of the commission on progress, but this is coming soon to a theater near you.
Yes, in Coos Bay.
In Technicolor.
Wonderful. So if we have no questions, we will go on to the next item, and this is an update on the 2019 legislative session. Ms. Baker. And what a session it was.
She's still standing.
She is still standing, and she's still smiling. That's, yes, exactly. I do hope that you had a bit of time on your own. And
I did.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair Bainey, members of the Commission. For the record, Lindsay Baker, ODOT Government Relations. So I'm here today to give you a sort of an update and a report, as it were, on the just recently concluded 2019 legislative session. And I think with 6 or 7 hours to spare, they finally concluded their business on June 30th. So as is true fashion, I will just talk at you as fast as I possibly can. Please feel free to interrupt me along the way. I've sort of got a few bills I'm going to talk to you about, and I think Jackie is handing each of you right now a printed copy of the 2019 legislative summary, which we just finalized and sort of hit publish on yesterday, so it's posted online, and we'll make sure that members of the public who are interested also have a link to that on the website. So this session was, like I mentioned, concluded on June 30th, which was, again, the last day, possibly, according to the Oregon Constitution, that the legislature could conclude its business. It was not without some angst, I think, and not without a lot of interesting sort of dynamics of the session. And for those of you that paid attention to the news coverage sort of throughout the duration, but particularly towards the last 2 or 3 weeks, you all saw how interesting and quite unprecedented it was. So there was a lot of bills that sort of made their way through the session that really didn't impact the Department of Transportation very much, but really colored a lot of of the conversation and really took up a lot of the energy and effort. And I think, as I made mention of at the very beginning of the legislative session, because of the historic action that legislature took in the 2017 session with package of House Bill 2017, I think we and I absolutely expected that the transportation conversation would be flying a little bit lower on the radar for the duration of the 2019 session. So the legislature did spend a lot of time focusing on revenue reform. They passed an unprecedented, historic gross receipts tax that would fund K-12 education across the state. That was House Bill 3427. They did some PERS reform, Senate Bill 1049. They did pass a 12-week Paid Family Leave Act, House Bill 2005. They did a lot of housing, tenant protection, rent control type measures this session, as well as some campaign finance. So again, those are sort of the bigger conversations that were happening, not only that we were related in or engaged in directly, but that really took up a lot of space this session. So now I will turn to a list of bills and measures that passed the legislature that we were particularly engaged in, or that in some way touch the agency or have some sort of relationship to the agency. So House Bill 2007, which I've spent a fair amount of time talking to you all about this session, was a bill, this is the clean diesel bill. So recall that is sort of, there's three main pieces of this measure. The first piece phases out, or phases in rather, clean diesel engine requirements starting in 2023 with subsequent increases or steps, I guess, intermittent steps in 2025 and 2029. It really focuses on medium duty and heavy duty vehicles. So these are the vehicles, medium duty for that 14 to 26,000 pound class, and heavy duty for anything over 26,000 pounds. So the sort of trigger and the enforcement mechanism is where ODOT comes into play. So the way that that the legislation enforces these requirements is by withholding registration or title on these vehicles. So we, in conjunction with our partners, the Department of Environmental Quality, will be doing a lot of work over the next few months and years to figure out what this enforcement program looks like, how we ensure that the vehicles are sort of which ones are eligible and applicable, one, and then two, how we ensure that the diesel engines are sufficiently clean, whether that is by model year or by a retro power or a refit. So the second piece of that measure is what's sort of been termed the clean contracting standards. So recall that we had a fair amount of conversation about this throughout the duration of session as well. What ultimately ended up being included in the measure was a requirement that for all state-funded, or excuse me, for all projects for which the state agency is the contracting agency that are over $20 million that are in the Portland metro areas, those are the three conditions, they have to be clean diesel sort of on-site fleet requirements. I think there is a question, and I will mention this as well, that the OTC does have explicit rulemaking authority in this space to figure out what that looks like, whether or not we're talking about a fleet averaging requirement, how we know that a fleet is sufficiently clean, and sort of a little bit more of that contracting nuance. But again, we will be working with the Department of Environmental Quality and you all as we try to figure out what that looks like. These requirements for the clean diesel contracting do not come into effect until for contracts that are solicited or executed after January 1 of 2022, with the exception of the three big ones in Portland, Rose Quarter, 217, and I-205, Stafford Road to 213. So those are sort of already grandfathered in. And then finally, what the measure does is it establishes a task force that is charged with looking at how we could possibly expand this regulation and this program to a statewide applicability, to getting additional vehicles in, to maybe putting a lower threshold for contracting, various different things that the task force is charged with reviewing. And then finally, the measure also authorizes DEQ to use the Volkswagen settlement funds. Recall that in 2011-13, the state settled a lawsuit with Volkswagen, and a bunch of funds were made available for clean diesel type air quality requirements. So the legislature did authorize DEQ to spend on a lot of that money, particularly focusing on small COVID and DBE firms to get some of this retro power and refit for their fleets. So that's House Bill 2007. House Bill 2015 is the next bill I'll talk about. This was the driver's license for all bill. This bill was sort of a little bit building on the work of, I think it was Senate Bill 833 in the 2013 session, that reduced the requirement so what 2015 did was it reduced the requirement in order for an individual to get a standard credentialed driver's license, so that they do not have to show proof of legal presence in the United States. So we worked very closely with the governor's office on this measure, as well as the proponents and legislators, to get this to a workable space, considering some timing requirements. I know you all are very familiar with the work that our DMV is doing on the system service transformation program right now, making sure that the timing and the workload and capacity was there. But this will take effect beginning in January of 2021, I believe. The next bill I'll talk about is House Bill 2164. So this is this session's omnibus tax credit package bill. The one thing that this measure did that is sort of new and specific to the Department of Transportation is it established a tax credit for rehabilitation of short line railroads. It has ODOT and Department of Revenue sort of jointly administering this program. We, as the agency that's charged with sort of certifying whether or not a rehabilitation program is sufficiently eligible for the tax credit, and it caps this credit at $4 million. I believe it's a year, but I think it's $4 million a year to eligible short line railroads. House Bill 2209 is another bill that sort of deals with our rail folks. So this was a measure that the Department of Environmental Quality, ODOT, a lot of different legislators, and then particularly the railroads, but class ones in particular, spent a lot of time working on. This had to do with the transport of hazardous material oil by rail. So what it does is it establishes a requirement that oil spill contingency planning, particularly focused on that environmental response and environmental cleanup, is performed. It establishes a triennial schedule by which these different rail lines and entities have to do these tabletop exercises, on the ground field training, that sort of thing. Again, with that focus less on the immediate sort of public safety protection of property response, and more on the long-term, potentially mid and long-term environmental effects of these types of incidents. House Bill 2592 was this session's omnibus relating to transportation measure. So in this, I think the bill was like 50, 60 pages long almost, and it was just sort of stuffed at the end of the day with a bunch of different provisions. But all of the provisions that the agency brought forward in Senate Bill 58, the agency legislative concept, were ultimately included in 2592. Importantly for the commission, all of the statutory changes that we requested as an agency for the OTC conflict of interest, and also really clarifying that role between the OTC and the CIAC, the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee, were all captured in this measure. So all of those were included, and there was like I said, a whole host of other things. The one thing I will note is that there was some Connect Oregon program changes that were included in this measure as well. We had a number of conversations with legislators and with stakeholders. A lot of it sort of was an outcrop of the Connect Oregon Rulemaking Advisory Committee that our TDD staff was engaging over last summer, early winter, as a follow-up to House Bill 2017 work. And so I think that at some point, the conversation really took the form of, we're having policy conversations. Let's go to talk to the legislature about what we want this program to look like. So importantly, from 2592, as it relates to Connect Oregon, we did a few things. One, eliminated the sort of distinction between Connect Oregon Part 1 and Part 2. Recall that Connect Oregon Part 1 was everything that was sort of that under $75 million threshold. Part 2 was that over $75 million threshold, or the projects of statewide significance. So we really eliminated that Part 1, Part 2 distinction entirely, and so now there's just a Connect Oregon program. The second thing we did was carve out the bike ped investment and the bike ped program separate and distinct from all of the what we think of as the Connect Oregon freight. So now there is the Connect Oregon program, which the eligible recipients are rail, aviation, and ports. And then on the other, sort of as a separate and distinct program, is what we call the Multimodal Active Transportation, or MAT fund. And this is for bike ped investments specifically. And I think the reason for that, and Commissioner Callery, you're looking at me like you sort of had this already on your mind in lots of ways. I think it was difficult to sort of distinguish and really weigh and pick between those types of projects that are fundamentally different. So I think we got a lot of support and a lot of people saying, yeah, that makes sense, sort of carve them out. So those were sort of the major pieces of the program changes in 2592. House Bill 2881 was a bill that the Road User Fee Task Force moved forward this session. So it was introduced by Representative John Lively, who I believe is a member of the Road User Fee Task Force. And this was really just another step in what has been to date a relatively iterative process. How do we make this program a little bit better? How do we make it a little bit more workable, knowing that we've already, one, demonstrated proof of concept, and two, that it is is operating and operational at this point. So a few things that this bill did was eliminate the enrollment caps entirely on the program. It grandfathered in all of those low MPG vehicles, but going forward, it required that any new vehicles coming in as participants had, I believe it's a 40 mile per hour per gallon standard or above. It provided some enforcement mechanisms for the agency for those individuals that are joining the REC program in lieu of paying that enhanced registration fee for electric vehicles, which was something that was included in House Bill 2017. It's a lot of relatively small provisions, but it's really, again, just trying to more mature and sort of sophisticate that program a little bit. House Bill 3213 was a bill relating to safety corridors. So recall that in statute, the Oregon Department of Transportation is able to designate safety corridors on state highways. What this really means is that we are allowed to put up signs. We are allowed to do maybe some engineering changes to really try to reduce the likelihood of traffic incidents, particularly those that have resulting in serious or fatal injuries to the involved parties. An important piece of what a state safety corridor or a safety corridor on a state highway looks like is that you are allowed to double the traffic penalties and the citations in that stretch of corridor. So we've had a lot of conversations over the past year or so about counties being interested in being able to designate these on county facilities, and because of the statute is written right now, they were not allowed to do that. So we worked really closely with a couple members of the legislature, as well as as well as counties, and some emergency response and law enforcement individuals on how we could sort of craft a pilot program to see whether or not this same model works on county roads. So what House Bill 3213 does is it establishes exactly that, which is a pilot program. The bill requires establishment of an advisory committee that's appointed by the ODOT director, and selection of 5 counties that would be allowed to participate in this pilot program. It sunsets in 2026, and I'm very hopeful, and I will be paying very close attention to this, but I'm hopeful that it demonstrates this can be a successful model on any road, not just on state highways, and we can have a future conversation about really expanding that to statewide. Senate Bill 558 was a bill relating to speeds. Recall that we've had a lot of conversation this session and the sort of 6 months leading up to the legislative session about speed and speed zones on facilities across the state. There was a number of different speed-related bills that were introduced, but this was actually the only one that passed the legislature this session. So what this bill does is, recall that in, I believe, the 2017 session, the city of Portland was given statutory authority to lower independently, unilaterally, without approval from ODOT, lower speed limits on, I think it's non-residential roads from 25 to 20 miles per hour. It's just that 5-mile gap. So what Senate Bill 558 does is it extends that existing statutory authority that's just the city of Portland to every city across the state. So this was a really big, I think, deal for a lot of cities and counties that now newly have this authority. And I think we are continuing to engage a conversation via the work that Paul has been doing, again, leading up to the 2019 session in that roundtable group. We've been engaging a lot of conversation, and we'll look ahead to the 2020 session to really do the remainder of bills that were on that list introduced this session but not passed. And then finally, I'll just sort of talk a little bit about our budget highlights. Actually, this was a quite successful session in terms of the agency and governor budget investments from the Department of Transportation. Recall that we asked for a number of positions. We asked for 54 positions that were really that third of 3 phased ask for our House Bill 2017 implementation and delivery. So our highway division got 54 new permanent positions to really support project delivery. which was a great success. We also got 49 positions in our DMV section to do some of that Real ID implementation. A couple of maintenance stations I think we got some funds for, and overall we got essentially everything we asked for. I think the two things I will call out specifically is recall that our passenger rail program has historically relied, and when I say historically I mean the past 3 or 4 biennia, has historically relied on about $10 million of general fund. This session we were able to sort of get off of general fund and switch that $10 million funding base to the transportation operating fund, which is something that we requested and the legislature agreed was a good idea. The second thing that happened in our budget, particularly in our public transit division, is there had been a $10.1 million general fund that went into the special transportation fund, which supported elderly and disabled transit services across the state. There was a lot of conversation, backroom conversation this session that happened. And so we did have that $10 million eliminated from the general fund eliminated from the STF and backfilled just for this biennium with $10.1 million from the STIF. I know Mr. Gard and his staff will be up here, I think right after me, talking about what that looks like going forward, but I did want to just call that out to your attention, and that was a big point of conversation this session. Okay, so those are all the bills that passed that I thought would be important to highlight. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions before I move on quickly to the bills that did not make it across the finish line.
Any questions? Go right ahead.
Okay, great. So the first bill I'll talk about is House Bill 2020. So I will sort of group this in with House Bill 2020, House Bill 3425, and Senate Bill 928. All of these, and again, all of the bills I'm talking about generally are all listed in your legislative summary. So this was a cap and trade measure. I think I spent a fair amount of time, both offline and in front of you this session, talking about the cap and trade program. We worked very hard in really close coordination with the governor's office and also members of the Joint Committee on Carbon Reduction to engage where appropriate and really figure out how to make this program work. Unfortunately, this bill did not make it across the finish line at the end of the day. I think right now, I get questions every day, well, what's going to happen? I would be very surprised if it did not come back in the 2020 session, but I don't know. I would imagine that a lot of those conversations are happening right now in terms of what is the strategy going forward. And the one thing I will note for the commission's information is that there was a lot of I think there can be a lot of conversation going forward about the impacts the transportation sector and the way that our agency and our sort of transportation sector generally engages in this program. So I think more to come on that. House Bill 2702 was one of the bills that I mentioned earlier in the context of the speed setting. So this bill originally, in its sort of introduced version, gave to the city of Portland the ability to set all speeds, again, unilaterally, unequivocally within the city of Portland, sort of where they are the road authority. We worked really closely with the city of Portland and some city of Portland legislators on sort of getting this bill to a point where it was not that the city of Portland had unilateral authority, but that they would get delegated authority pursuant to a certain number of conditions, and that would not be exclusive to the city of Portland, but to all cities across the state. So the Joint Committee on Transportation ultimately did not move this bill forward, but we have committed, and I have committed to our city partners, that we will continue to work on this during the interim and come back in the 2020 session with similar legislation. House Bill 2770 was a bill that was introduced and was recommended by the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force. So recall that in the 2018 session, House Bill 4063 established ODOT as the lead agency for autonomous vehicle technology. And we, ODOT, staffed a task force over the interim between 2018 and 2019 sessions, looking at what can we do to regulate this space in a meaningful way. The bill that was ultimately introduced was sort of establishing ODOT as administering a testing scheme and a testing and registration protocol. And this bill, despite passing out of the House of Representatives, did not make its way through the Senate. So I think there will be more conversations in the interim, and I would expect that there will be some legislation brought forward in the 2020 session to either sort of exactly address the same thing or perhaps even build upon it a little bit more. House Bill 3023 is a bill that I also have spent a lot of time talking to you all about. This is the bill that regulates TNC's transportation network companies. This is the ride-sharing apps, Uber and Lyft. We had a tremendous amount of conversation about this measure. In its sort of most recent iteration, it was ODOT administering a regulatory framework and a regulatory scheme for TNCs, sort of jointly and co-enforcing with our local government partners that wanted to be doing that enforcement. So this bill made its way through the House Business and Labor Committee, went to the House Committee on Revenue, went to the Joint Committee on Ways and Means, where it never saw the light of day after that. So interestingly, this is the fourth session, I believe, that there has been some TNC-related legislation. And every session it has been relatively similar to this, where it makes its way out of Policy Committee and then never pops back up. So I don't know if the next steps on this is another work group or another task force, or if someone has a better idea for how we can maybe be more successful. But ultimately, it did not make it through this session. I would be, again, surprised based off of history if we did not continue to have some conversation about this in some way until there is some state law regulating this space. House Bill 3209 was a bill that was introduced by a coalition of members, particularly those in the Clackamas County area. This bill would have authorized $460 million of general obligation bonding to fund the I-205 Staff Route 213 project. We had a lot of conversation with legislative leadership this session about how are we going to fund I-205, considering this was the one that was sort of left off the table after the House Bill 2017 package passed. So this bill did not move forward. There was no legislative action taken this session specific to the I-205 project. And the last bill I will talk about is House Bill 3454. This was a bill that, in my observation, was more of a symbolic late introduction to start the conversation more than anything else. This was a bill that was introduced by Representative Greg Smith that eliminated and completely repealed Oregon's weight mile system. So recall that in the context of House Bill 2020, to some degree, we had a few number of conversations about changing the weight mile tax system, sort of ranging from what can we do to make it a little bit better and sort of administrative efficiency increases, all the way to how do we just get rid of it entirely and replace it with a brand new mechanism. So those conversations happened. They sort of died down at some point, and then we saw House Bill 3454 introduced. I think it was the second to last week of session. So it never received a hearing, didn't really go anywhere. Obviously, didn't get through the building, but sort of more flagging for the commission that this is a conversation I expect we will continue to have in some form for at least another year or two. So that's everything that's on my list. Happy to answer any questions if there are anything specific. Otherwise, you all will not see me for a couple of months, and then we start to talk about next session, the session after that.
Any particular questions? No. I would like to say thank you.
Absolutely.
Your thoroughness, your professionalism, your responsiveness. I couldn't have been more pleased with how this all worked with a really aggressive legislative session. And so thank you so much for all that you've given us. I've felt really up to speed on what's happening in a very vastly changing environment with some choppy waters. So thank you so much for your dedication to the work that you do, and just thrilled that you're part of the team.
Chair Bainey, I very much appreciate that. I will say that this was my first session at ODOT, so I'm glad it was relatively easy, despite the fact that it was insanely choppy waters at the same time. But I will also say I've got a great team. We've got a great team here at ODOT, so it's easy for me to do my job.
Great. Well, proud to work with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think it was, I agree with the chair, it's phenomenal effort and in an interesting session, and more to come.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Guard, she teed you up a bit. And Ms. Hoskins, we will go ahead and move on to the next item, which is a couple of items together. We will have an update on the Special Transportation Fund and the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, the interactions of both of those, and some projects as well. So, kicking us off, Mr. Gard, I will turn it over to you.
Chair Bainey, members of the commission, my name is Hal Gard. I'm the administrator of the Rail and Public Transit Division for the department. With me today is Marcia Hoskins. She is the section manager for Public Transit Division. Lindsay did a good job teeing this up for us. And we're really here to talk about some of the legislatively directed changes to two of our key state fund programs for public transportation. We were given a couple of legislative directions. One is through a budget note. You have the actual language in front of us, but essentially this budget note directs us to merge the Special Transportation Fund and the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund into a single program. We were directed to minimize the disruption to the Special Transportation Fund formula allocations and the STF agencies. We were to maintain STF agency plans and formula distributions for fiscal year 2019-21, and we were to report during the 2020 session on the status of the consolidated programs and the FTE needed to administer the consolidated program. That's all. That's all we have to do. Again, we were given further authority with regard to the STIF transfer through House Bill 2377. Given the fact that we were not given our $10.1 million in the general fund for the STF program, that $10.1 million needed to come from the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. And just as a reminder, I think everybody here knows, but that statewide Special Transportation Fund is dedicated to helping elderly and disabled folks in their regular duties. So it's got a little different target than the transit improvements that are directed under the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. The money transfer was to occur by the 1st of July 2019. And so given that budget note and the direction in House Bill 2377, where we intend to continue operating both programs as directed by existing statute, since the statutory direction has not changed at all, for the duration of this biennium. We will transfer $10.1 million from the STIF to STF to keep the STF agencies whole. This is particularly important because the rural service providers are those that are most highly dependent upon those STF funds. And we're going to stand up an advisory committee to help us evaluate the means to consolidate these two programs, to make any recommendations necessary to smooth the transition. And it's important, I think, for us to maintain the, not just the legislative direction, but the intent behind the original Special Transportation Fund rules and make sure that those are incorporated appropriately in the goals that are already established in the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. And then our final piece of work is to build a 2021-23 public transportation budget that assumes the current STF and STF programs have been fully merged. So that's what's before us. We really tried to look very hard at ways to meet the legislative intent and shift that $10.1 million over, and this was trying to take into consideration also the fact that the Commission has already approved a series of formula plans for about 1/2 of the funds available, and the STF agencies have already submitted grant applications for the current biennium, and those have been approved. So we were kind of locked in with financial sideboards. So these are the three scenarios that we identified, and I'm going to let Marcia walk through the details of the three scenarios so that the Commission kind of understands where we're going with this. Okay.
Oops.
You got it.
You have to be aggressive.
Yeah, you just turned it back off. There you go.
Okay. Chair Boehne, Commissioners, for the record, my name is Marcia Hoskins. I'm the Public Transportation Manager for the Oregon Department of Transportation. As Hal referenced, we, given the boundaries and the limits that were on our thinking in terms of implementing this transfer from the STIF to the STF, we looked at 3 different scenarios. You will hear later, we actually then worked those scenarios with our Public Transportation Advisory Committee. and I'll get to that in a couple of slides. The first scenario we looked at took the 10.1 million amount of funding that needed to be backfilled in the STF right off the top of the STIF. What that basically does is reduce the formula funds to qualified entities by approximately 5.4%. You have in your attachment the detail of how that impacts each specific agency. We did keep the qualified entities that were small enough that they only received the minimum allocation. We kept those minimums in place. And if you spread it across all of the different STIF funds, it reduced the discretionary funds that were available by approximately $900,000. However, it still would have funded the advisory committee's recommendation for those discretionary awards. It just would not have left as large an amount unallocated. So that was scenario one. Scenario two, as you heard me reference, the Public Transportation Advisory Committee has a recommendation on the SCIF discretionary and intercommunity, as well as our statewide transit network projects, and that particular recommendation leaves $2.3 million unobligated from that pot of money. And so scenario two sweeps that $2.3 million of unobligated discretionary funding to then reduce the amount that would need to come out of the STIF formula funds. It lessens the impact on the formula fund recipients to about 4.7%, and it still leaves the qualified entities continuing to receive their minimum allocations. The last scenario, scenario three that we looked at, is that obviously the commission has the ability to take all of the 10.1 out of the STIF discretionary and intercommunity discretionary, which reduces or eliminates impact on the formula fund agencies. However, that also leaves less money, obviously, to be awarded for the STIF discretionary awards. It would not allow funding of all the recommended projects that our advisory committee is putting forward. So it most likely would require us to go back to our advisory committee and have them reprioritize the funding with whatever money is left. So the Public Transportation Advisory Committee is recommending to the Commission that we use scenario two, which is sweeping the unobligated discretionary STIF funding and then taking the remaining approximately $7 million out of the formula funding, the STIF formula. The rationale for that is that the actual transit tax revenue that is coming in is exceeding our December 2018 forecast, and that was the number that all of the qualified entities used to create their STIF plans. So with that excess revenue coming in, even taking $7 million out of formula, the qualified entities would most likely be able, if this continues, to fully fund their 100% project list. They just could not. If you will recall, the STIF plans actually ask qualified entities to propose 130% project list. This scenario would allow them to at least fully fund their 100% list. It sweeps up the $2.3 million in discretionary funds that would otherwise be carried forward to fiscal year 21-23. So basically, it means we don't have this unobligated, unused pot of money that's carried forward to the next biennium. And it would allow funding the advisory committee's recommended discretionary projects.
Okay. You got the deal? Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so next steps for us is the formation of an advisory committee to really help us complete a series of recommendations for the merger of the two programs. We are proceeding with this. We will select individuals who represent public transportation service providers, both large urban, small urban, rural areas, tribes, counties, cities, non-government agencies, as well as advocates for seniors, advocates for folks with disabilities, equity and environmental justice advocates, and social and human service agencies. With PTAC, we will develop a list of names. We will submit those to Deputy Director Mather for appointment moving forward. And we've got a really aggressive schedule in order to be able to complete this work. We need to stand up this committee by August. We need to conduct the committee meetings likely twice a month during September and October in order to be able to have that list of concepts in place. And when I say concept, I do not mean legislative language. I really do mean what are the broad framework in order to be able to meet the intent of both the previous statutes. We need to, or would like to be able to present those concepts to the commission at their November meeting, and then have something for the legislature to consider by the short session in February. And then if they approve the consolidation legislation, we would immediately begin rulemaking to implement the consolidation in preparation for a 21-23 biennium. With that, we're going to move on to the PTAC discretionary grant awards that they put together. Do you need this? We're out of slides, right?
We don't have.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so we do not have a PowerPoint for this particular piece. However, you have the cover letter as well as 2 attachments that talk about our advisory committee's recommendation for discretionary awards. The STIF administrative rules actually call on the commission to determine the acceptance or rejection of the grant applications for the STIF discretionary funds. The advisory committee is recommending projects that are actually funded from 3 different fund sources. These, the STIF discretionary, the STIF intercommunity fund, as well as our Federal Transit Administration's Section 5311F intercity funds. This is one of our first forays into trying to do an integrated solicitation where we consider the agencies submit their projects and we, based on criteria and weighting, determine the best funding to use. They're sort of blind to the funding when they actually submit it. The attachment 1 with this reminds the commission of the criteria that you approved for the selection committee to use when evaluating these projects around things like equity and improved services for low income, as well as connections between communities. Attachment 2 actually gives you detail on the recommended projects, so I will just give you some high points. We received 64 applications for these projects. Our staff screened these applications for eligibility and then forwarded them to a selection committee of both internal and external members who scored each of these projects based on the commission-approved criteria. They then presented a list of recommendations to our Public Transportation Advisory Committee. On July 1st, the Advisory Committee reviewed and then recommended a list of prioritized projects for funding to the Commission, and that's the list that you have in Attachment 2. In developing their recommendation, our Advisory Committee considered input from the original STIF Selection Committee, as well as qualified entity advisory committees and area commissions on transportation, and public comment was also made on the recommended projects. Public Transportation Advisory Committee members recused themselves from voting on projects which they might have a financial interest, just as a FYI. It made for some equally interesting motions amongst the PTAC that you all are dealing with. The recommended award totals for the 3 fund sources, a bit of detail, it's about $10.5 million from the STIF discretionary, $7.3 million from the STIF intercommunity, and $1.3 million from FTA Section 5311F. It does leave, as I noted earlier when talking about the scenarios, $2.3 million unobligated funds that could, depending on how the commission votes, be either moved into the next biennium or used to help us with our particular charge of transferring funds. Projected benefits of those awards, just kind of at a high level, 9 new routes are included in those discretionary projects, additional route expansions, increased frequency, and then preservation of intercity routes for the federal component. 38 vehicles are included in those awards, 423 units of equipment, so a lot of new equipment, 73 new signs and shelters, and actually 3 facilities that will be constructed, expanded, or renovated. So again, it allocates 19 million in investments across capital projects, operating projects, planning projects, all of which met and scored high against the criteria that the commission came up with.
So,
Questions on that?
I have a couple of questions, just maybe highlight. So first, if you wouldn't mind commenting on PTAC's reasoning for not including the project that was mentioned under public comment today, who's the
Sure.
whose
Sure, I
project,
can
and then
speak, yeah.
also there is a project that was the recommendation is to allocate funds that is over and above what they actually had requested. So it was essentially awarding more than they had submitted in terms of an application, and that's the Diamond Express. So it looks as though they requested 93,000, but they are recommended for funding of 187,000. So just a backcast of how that came about.
Certainly. That one, the Diamond Express one, I'll say right up front, I'm going to have to look into. I was not aware that we awarded anything over and above what they asked for, so it may just be how we displayed those. I can get back to
And
that.
it's not, it's a recommendation. The way I'm reading it, maybe I'm not reading it correctly, but the materials show funding requested and selection committee funding recommended is 93,000 and change. PTAC recommended funding amount is 187,000.
Oh, is that lane transit?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I can absolutely speak to that.
Oh,
one.
it's
Thank
okay.
you. Sorry,
And
Diamond
maybe I'm
Express
not-
threw
yep,
me off.
Not a
so.
worry.
Yeah. So first I can speak a little bit to the public comment from the Coos County Area Transit and mainly just present the selection committee's discussion about those two particular projects that then fed into their recommendation and that our Public Transportation Advisory Committee accepted the recommendation. For the Lifeline service, where the selection committee actually recommended a feasibility study, there are a couple of other new services in our recommendations, by the way, that also are going to be doing a feasibility study. So I did want to speak to that particular piece. The selection committee was concerned about the fare, the $20 fare that was noted in the application for that particular service. And so they felt that a feasibility study that took a look at ridership analysis as well as fare analysis would be wise to do prior to implementing that service. They also were aware that Coos County Area Transit is in the middle of doing a transit master plan. So the selection committee at least felt that would not be too big a lift. They would already have quite a bit of public input and data from that particular master planning effort. And again, it did fund the service. It just recommended a feasibility first with ridership and fare analysis. The second piece, the Transportation District initiative, the committee didn't believe that that was consistent with the Transportation Commission investment priorities. It didn't necessarily score highly against all the criteria that we were looking at. There was also a concern that that project would supplant local funds, because normally when you're funding a transportation district, that's a local governance issue. And so the state providing funding would negate the need to come up with local funds, particularly for elections. That's generally not something that the state steps into at a local level. And then the committee recognized the capacity building elements of this proposal. However, when they looked at the scoring and reviewed it against the criteria, they determined not to recommend it for funding. And then the second piece, the Diamond Express, the Lane Transit District, that was actually, the selection committee recommended the lower amount of the $93,000. During the Public Transportation Advisory Committee meeting on July 1st, Lane Transit provided public comment that noted that the total project cost was, the grant amount they had intended to seek was double that. This was the first time through this particular application for these particular kinds of projects, and Lane Transit District in public comment noted they had just flat made an error in their budget table and got mixed up on the match amount and only requested half of the funding. The advisory committee had a pretty healthy discussion around Normally in discretionary projects, what you submit is a done deal. You don't get to go back and change them again. However, they recognize this was the first time through the statewide transit network and stiff discretionary and intercommunity solicitation. It was a new form, new software. And so the PTAC actually voted to restore the amount to the full 183. Okay.
So Commissioner, I think I'm going to need your help with this. So there are two asks.
Yes.
One is approval of the one of the three scenarios that we laid out, and staff recommendation is scenario number 2. The second is commission approval of the discretionary grant awards for this program.
And I do believe, first, do we have any other questions in terms of what's been presented? Okay. And then I also will ask if any commissioners have potential conflicts of interest.
I don't have any discussion, other than to say I attended the Public Transit Advisory Committee's discussion during this time, just for observation, see how the process worked. And it was very robust, and I have to say that they did a really good job as far as taking what the selection committee had presented to them and then having a discussion about it. So
Great.
I applaud Public Transit because they did a really good job on this.
Do you by chance have a conflict that you would like to acknowledge?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm the general manager of the Rogue Valley Transportation District and have a conflict with both 1 and F2, and will recuse myself from.
Okay. Anyone else have any conflicts of interest that they would like to note?
Madam Chair, my law firm represents several of the recipients of these, potential recipients of these grants, including TriMet, Oregon State University, and Josephine County. So I'm going to declare a potential conflict of interest and recuse myself from the proceedings with respect to both F1 and F2.
Okay. And I believe we will ask you to depart. Thank you. There'll be, not sure if there's cake out there yet, but. And I too would like to put on the record that although a bit arm's length, I am the executive director of the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council, and although we operate 7 businesses under that umbrella, one of those businesses happens to be transit. We are not a qualified entity, but we are a contract provider. So I will not be participating in the deliberations, and so I will turn to my 2 colleagues and walk you through this process. So if you have other questions or comments that you'd like to make, please go right ahead.
Madam Chair, I have no additional comments or questions or concerns regarding what's been addressed today, and so therefore I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, very good.
So with that, I move to transfer the SCIF funds to the STF fund by applying scenario 2, sweeps unobligated discretionary funds first, remainder from formula fund, and
Okay.
as the option to move forward with.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Okay, and for the purpose of a quorum, I will abstain, but I am present to make sure that you can move forward. Any other motion that you feel prepared to offer, go right ahead.
I have no other potential or actual conflicts, so I would propose that we move to approve the award of the stiff discretionary grants as recommended by the PTAC.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much. I appreciate the additional information, and I very much appreciate our partners coming from Coos County to share with us their concerns. We'll take that into consideration as well. Mr. Guard, great process. We also have the committee that we need to bless.
Technically, Chair Boehne, the legislature put that charge on the department,
Oh, right,
on the
thank you.
commission.
Okay.
So we were simply sharing that as information.
Excellent.
And so we'll be moving forward, but we will be bringing to the commission the results of that committee's work.
Okay,
All righty?
very good.
I want to thank you very much. And Chair Boehne, just on a personal note, it has been a joy and a pleasure to work with you. And
thank you.
I'm sorry to see that chair change, but I hope to see you in other capacities in the future.
You just never know where I might pop up.
Never know.
This is actually my
Never know.
last meeting in this room. Well, of course, my last meeting is next month, but yes, I'll be a photo on the wall. You can walk by and just smile, but I'll come in and say hello. And Mr. Guard, it's been a pleasure to work with you as well. 8 years with this agency has been quite a pleasure and an honor. So
Try 26.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Is Commissioner Brown having cake?
She's right out there.
Okay, very good. All right. So let's move on to an update. And this is an item that we approved last month, but wanted to have an opportunity because it is our #1 priority, which is safety at the Department of Transportation. And this is an update on the 2020 Oregon Transportation Safety Performance Plan. Mr. Hoffer, wonderful to see you again. Mr. Casales, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners. My name is Troy Costales, Administrator of the Safety Division for the Oregon Department of Transportation.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, my name is Victor Hoffer. I'm the Chair of the Oregon Transportation Safety Committee. I'd like to let you know that my background a little bit, I've been a paramedic and have been in EMS for 39 years, soon to be 40 years. Yes, I do look old because I am. I work for Marion County Fire, which is in Salem, and I'm a volunteer for the Mount Angel Fire where I live. I have a background in law and religion, which most of you don't know about. I've served as a hospital chaplain at UCLA Medical Center and at Herman Memorial Hospital in Houston. And to many of your surprise, I am a practicing lawyer. In each of these professions, I have seen the tragedy and the aftermath of motor vehicle crashes. And I'm so glad that you have worked with the OTSC for those things. And Commissioner Brown, it's a pleasure to see you. I guess you're my boss today, I'm not yours. And I brought you my book that is published. It's called The 63-Year-Old Probie. I'm 66 2 days ago, so I'm still going. Oh, thank you.
Commissioners, I appreciate your approval last month of the 2020 Highway Safety Plan. That helps us on our July 1st deadline of when ODOT turns in that application to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and we're right now in discussions with that agency relationship to the application. The whole process starts in January. It's a 5-month ramp up to bring to you the final plan for your approval in June. And this year, in January, we met at the Police Academy in South Salem. We had 28 different agencies around the state that joined with the OTSC as the host to have a conversation about what topic areas should this plan cover. And in each of those topic areas, what should be the expected performance measures that we are willing to put ink on paper and commit to with our time or our money. Some of the agencies that were in the room with the Traffic Safety Committee was the Association of Oregon Counties, Public Works from the City of Salem, Clackamas County's Traffic Safety Commission, our Driver Education Advisory Committee, Governor's Advisory Committee on DUII, Legacy Emmanuel Trauma Nurses Talk Tough, Multnomah County Circuit Court, various offices from ODOT, from motor vehicles, motor carrier, transportation development, highway with the regions, and also Oregon State University from the research point of view, the Governor's Advisory Committee on Motorcycle Safety, the Morrow County Sheriff's Office, the Oregon Health Authority, the Oregon State Police, and then Safe Routes to School National Partnership. The reason why I give you a sample of some of the people in the room is to share with you there is a wide audience that have interest in highway safety. And the OTSC on the point of this conversation helps facilitate and lead that day-long conversation about what we should be putting for our performance measures and where should we be heading. So I'll turn to Chair Hoffer to let him describe a little about OTSC's involvement in that day's efforts.
Thank you. The OTSC members on that day, they were present, and we were there to help moderate the discussions in each of the rooms. These discussions go wide-ranging, kind of like your public input here every day. You never know where it's going to go. So we're there for that in each room. We make sure to listen to our partners and their ideas. We want to hear their voices because they come from far and wide. And we want to hear that voice and put it as part of our highway safety plan. But there are also, we watch for emerging issues within the concerns and the conversations. Often those concerns are not in data, but they're in experiences and feelings. And each of you have driven down the road and where you work, you know that you can't always put it on paper and numbers. You just know there's an issue and a problem. And we're there to hear those issues and problems and look at them and try to solve them and go forward. It is a forum to help us move forward and to incorporate many issues and ideas for the safety of Oregonians. That's what we do in those many minutes of speaking and listening.
So the Safety Division staff works with the Safety Committee on that day, and then for the next 3 months, working with additional partners in order to refine the commentary and refine the expectations that go into the plan that then lead into a conversation coming back to the OTSC in a formal fashion in May to get their approval of us filling out the rest of the document that started in January. And then in turn, generally speaking, the chair of the committee and myself come before the OTC for approval to submit to the US DOT. As this plan is submitted this year to NHTSA, we were alerted that NHTSA will be handling a redistribution of some of the NHTSA funds. Typically, the commission hears about the federal highway funds redistribution. This year, we're going to see a National Highway Traffic Safety Administration redistribution. The reason is that Congress created about seven different topic areas of funding states and territories can apply for. Distracted driving, motorcycle safety, impaired driving, occupant protection, traffic records, pedestrian bicyclist safety. And generally what happens is as states and territories apply, the buckets that they hold to the national level are distributed to all of you. Everybody, it's all doled out. Well, there are 2 buckets of funds this year that were not and are not anticipated to be distributed come October 1. The first is in the area of graduated driver licensing for teens. Congress created a bar that is so high that no state or territory in the country will qualify. So that entire bucket sits unallocated. The second is in the area of distracted driving. When Oregon applied last year in the distracted driving area, we became the 4th state out of the 54 jurisdictions eligible for the funds. We are the number 4 in being able to receive those funds, and that's part of our program that we're delivering this year. But that meant that there are 50 other jurisdictions that did not, and there's a big hefty balance in that account as well. In the past, and I'm talking past over the last 15, 20 years that have been in this position, typically when NHTSA has money left over, they will say to you, we think everybody in the country needs to work on their data systems, and they put the extra money in a category. Or we're seeing an issue with seatbelt use or car seat use in the country, and they'll put the money in a particular category. States representatives such as myself talked to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration as well as Congress that said that isn't necessarily always helpful. Sometimes we can't qualify for an area of the funding because we don't have any programs underneath it to support it. So by earmarking it, we can't flex it back into the program area to help us at least get a little bit of a leg up. So this year, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration will be likely sending the states redistribution funds, and we're expecting in Oregon to see somewhere around $500,000 to be able to add on to for a one-time effort into the highway safety plan for 2020. It's a conversation we'll have with the OTSC from staff, the OTSC, and then in turn to the commission as a amendment to the plan to add those funds when we know what the real amount is. But getting ready for that, the OTSC at their last meeting dedicated a good chunk of their last meeting time to talk about what do they see as the priorities, some of them coming from that January conversation and leading forward, and what do they believe from their point of view, similar chair to yours, that should looked at as a one-time investment starting in October of 19 for next year, should that redistribution come forward. So I turn to Chair Hoffer to give you a little bit of insight as to what their conversation and priorities look like should that redistribution actually appear.
Thank you. Chair Boehning, Commissioner Brown, you know how I run my meetings, right? Last meeting, we had the most robust discussion we've had for a long time. My meeting was out of control, which is surprising, huh, Commissioner Brown? And we had a robust discussion. And within that discussion, there are some obvious areas, some long-standing areas that need help, and such as law enforcement. law enforcement continues to struggle with budget constraints throughout the state and recruitment difficulties. So we're there trying to give them grant money, and they cannot even take the money because they have no one to fill the shifts. So law enforcement is a high priority. Pedestrian safety continues to be an issue in the state, not just in urban areas, but in rural areas. So we are looking to fund more pedestrian safety. Motorcycle deaths have taken a steep rise in 2018, and it is with heartfelt sadness that I have, because I've been on many of those statistics personally. They're not just data to me because I'm there with a fire truck or medic or rescue. So motorcycle deaths is very important. Now trucking, motor carriers, we continue there to work with the AAA, the Oregon Trucking Association, and our motor carrier transportation division. Finally, I want to remind you how much we support safety corridors. ODOT safety corridors have made a difference. And I must add, as always, for me, EMS is the E in highway safety, the final E when nothing else can go right. And I guarantee you, we are there when all else fails. We are there.
So, Madam Chair, part of what you may have heard in the legislative report earlier today, and along the lines with Chair Hoffer's commentary about safety corridors, one of the bills passed by the legislature this session was to stand up a pilot program for county government to create their own safety corridors. So 5 counties be selected, and each county will be given the authority to select a road under their own authority to designate as a safety corridor. The responsibility falls on the department to go through and create the rules and the processes so the counties can run a safety corridor program and then report back to the legislature in 2022 and 2024 about how a pilot program under the county commission authority would roll out, and how does it work compared to the successful program that we've experienced with the ODOT's safety corridors. And so what we anticipate coming back to you sometime later this year is with that rule as to how that program will operate, and what are the framework that the counties will operate under. And similar to Mr. Guard's commentary about the committee and attaching to the director and Deputy Director Mather, there will be a 6-member county safety corridor group, 2 from ODOT, 2 from the counties, 1 member representing fire or EMS, emergency medical services, and 1 member representing law enforcement. That 6-member committee is in statute to be appointed by the director, but underneath the framework of the rules that would pass through the OTSC and through the commission to be put in play to stand up that program. There's a lot of work that needs to go on to figure out how this exactly will work, because we have our program, and how do you translate that into rules and into the counties being able to move forward. So that's something that will come to you later this year as an administrative rule request to stand up that program.
I have a quick question. Is that coupled with enforcement on the local level as well?
Madam Chair, the expectation in law and the conversation during session was that the counties, county road, county ran with county resources. That this is intended to be something that if the pilots prove successful and you open it up and say all 36 counties have the opportunity, it's something the county commissions have a direct authority over, from the engineering, the education, the enforcement, and the emergency medical services that would be involved in that stretch of road. These stretch of roads will and must be signed as double fine. That's not a discretionary item. It's actually in law that says they will be a double fine stretch of road as well.
Excellent. Yeah. It just seems as though if that commitment is made, knowing that OSP, so it's not trying to anticipate, many counties have not made the investments into their own law enforcement. It's been a challenge. And so if we just have posting and we have a corridor, but we don't have enforcement, then we will be back at the same place. Okay.
To make it work, as many of the E's need to be present as possible. Yeah.
Well, the OTSC members, we monitor legislation throughout the session, such as House Bill 3213, and we will keep a close watch, and we will be involved in the safety corridor rulemaking and its development. So we support the legislation. Now, I want to remind you, safety corridors have worked on state highways, and they will work on county roads as well.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I want to thank you for the opportunity to come before you. I know last meeting was a little tight on the agenda time, and so I appreciate you giving us the opportunity and have Victor here with you as chair of the OTSC to talk about their priorities, and they'll follow up on the approval of the plan. And as Mr. Gard said, Madam Chair, it's been great working with you for the past 8 years. You've raised up questions that have helped made us think, and we appreciate that in order to make our programs that much better. So, thank you for your time serving in the chair role for the commission.
A couple questions, though.
Yeah.
So, do any of my colleagues, Commissioner Brown?
I'll wait till the end.
So
Go ahead.
some things that popped out to me in terms of the performance plan. First, older adults in the aging population in terms of, the last time that they may have had any education is when they were able to secure their license at 16. And if I'm 80, that's a bit of a delta there between the time of what I knew then and what I know now. And I suspect that a couple of laws have changed in that time frame as well. So I was appreciative to see that that's something that's really rising to the priority list. I'm not picking on you. Cities and counties, the piece in here, so first of all, as I was looking at some of the fatality and injury crashes and the number of individuals per thousand, I couldn't help but note that many of those are happening in the rural areas at a higher level. And we know that, of course, enforcement, we know the road is engineered in a different way, shoulders, all of those good things. In looking at some of the performance measures and strategies, it's a lot of assisting and providing assistance and coordination to the smaller rural communities. And my question is, it's great to offer assistance and to provide coordination, but if there isn't capacity at that county or that city to have someone who is available to take that assistance, it really is more just a strategy on paper. So thoughts about how you assist smaller rural communities who may not have a person who can be that link to affecting change.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are cases where you're correct. The professional in some of the communities, the positions don't even exist for that local area. So what we've done at the statewide level, a couple different ways. A circuit rider, somebody that does purposely travel the state and goes in and helps that people that may not have that expertise or that background to actually show them, here's how you can access the data. Here's how you can access grants. Here's where you can go find out training of how to have somebody become a local child safety seat technician. So sit with them and be able to provide them that one-to-one potential help. We move our training around the state. With the police academy here that's in South Salem, we fund a full-time FTE in the training area for the police academy and for the purposes of holding courses not at the police academy, and move them around. In some cases, classes of only 2 or 3 people that may come to those classes. We will subsidize that effort in order to bring that training, because sometimes you may have somebody there that can't afford to send them across the state to come into the academy. And then lastly, what at times we'll do is have some folks that are essentially on retainer. In your local community options is an example of one of those nonprofit organizations that we've worked with. For them, it's in the pedestrian bicycle safe routes area, where they are a go-to for Central Eastern Oregon and have the ability from their location to provide assistance. And we give them the funding and the resources to be able to essentially be a voice and the eyes and the arms and the legs of our programs in other parts of the state as well. So we need to take the resources to the community and not sit back and expect the community necessarily to come to the resources. Yep.
So my comment was to Chair Hoffer. I actually, for those of you that didn't know, I cut my teeth on this committee and started out on the safety committee for a very short stint. And I applaud all of you. I know this plan well, because this was one of the tasks that I participated on before I became commissioner. And just looking at it, it's nice to see the reduction in the regions on some of this, but I am interested, and I will love to hear the feedback if NHTSA does actually make those funds available, what we'll be able to do with them, because law enforcement is really lacking as far as our highway system, and I know this well because I travel a big piece of it all the time, and it needs to improve because the speeding and the distracted driving. I saw at least 4 trucks yesterday afternoon who crossed the line into my lane of travel, and when I got up next to them, they were looking at their phones. So we know there's distracted driving going on, and it's pretty serious. So thank you for all you do, and thank you, Victor, for your leadership on that group. And have you replaced me? No. Not yet.
There
Okay,
would never
so
be a replacement.
I was going to say, he said it was out of control, and I thought, how could it be out of control? I'm over here now. But if anybody in the audience is interested, this is a great group to actually put your application into the governor. So I'm just pitching a little here.
Great.
Chair Benny, Commissioner Brown, I'm just doing your work and my work together. I mean, job of two. And I do want to thank the OTC for their support. And Chair Benny, I have written down how wonderful it is to see you and how much work you've done for the Oregonians for not just highway safety, but everything. But I cannot say what's in my heart for what you have done for the state of Oregon and what you have done for highway safety. It's beyond me being lost for words, and you know I'm never lost for words. So you will be missed, particularly by me.
Well, thank you,
And you
Chair.
will be missed by my committee. And thank you so much for everything. And thank you today to all the commissioners.
Absolutely, and thank you for your commitment and leadership as well.
Thank
Okay.
you, Madam Chair. There's no ask or anything for approval. That was last month in your consent agenda. So appreciate the
Yes.
time, the ability to come before you to give you a quick update on the safety program within the safety division.
Excellent. Wonderful to see you both, and thank you very much. Oh, please, yes.
The bench, wow.
I know, we've just been elevated.
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
Yeah, right. It's actually Bob here. He's just, you know.
Whatever.
And you know that 2 of my brothers are in fire service, and so I have a particular spot in my heart for the work that you do. So thank you so much. All right, team, let's move on to approving the proposed implementation for the transportation management area. And we have our MPO colleagues and friends here as well. Yes, please, Ms. Bohart, shall I just go ahead and kick it off and turn it
Yes,
over to you?
please.
And we have a PowerPoint presentation here.
So, good afternoon, Commissioners. It's going to be a hard act to follow after that. But I'm Jerry Bohard, Transportation Development Division Administrator for the record. And I think that we have some really important people sitting on, so I'd like to ask them to self-introduce who they are and what MPO that they come from. So, starting with Metro. You got it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Ken Lobeck. I'm with the Portland Metro MPO. I am the Funding Programs Lead, or MTIP Manager, responsible for amendments and programming.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I'm Paul Thompson. I'm the manager of the Central Lane MPO, covering the Eugene, Springfield, Coburg metropolitan area.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, I am Mike Jaffe. I'm the Transportation Planning Director for the Salem-Kaiser area MPO and the Council of Governments, Mid-Atlantic Valley Council of Governments.
So I'm just going to take a few minutes to set a little context about how we play with the MPOs and then turn it over to Jeff Flowers, who's actually going to go through the presentation. So, well, I think it's very important that we connect with the MPOs relative to the STIP. We connect and coordinate with them in a variety of other ways. And I think it's also important to know that in this conversation, we're really working with our larger MPOs, and we talk about our TMAs, but we actually have 10 MPOs throughout the state. Obviously, a couple of them are by state. But I think most importantly is that each of our region planning areas, they actually have a liaison tied to every one of our MPOs. So they're directly engaged in the work that the MPOs do. So whether we're talking about their regional transportation plan, which is sort of similar to whether you want to call it a regional transportation regional TSP or connected to the Oregon Transportation Plan. So they're doing long-range planning. You're going to hear about their MTIP, so like our STIP. We work a lot with them with other studies. They actually do a work program annually. The UPWP is what we refer to it as. And we get very engaged in there from an agency standpoint, so doing some of our planning together. Quarterly, Mr. Havig actually meets with most of the gentlemen here, sort of the peer planning directors, talk about issues, learn from each other, really have that conversation that I think makes all of us better. We also have either our region managers or our area managers typically sit on the policy advisory committees to the MPOs. They have technical advisory committees that we're also engaged in. I myself sit on the UMPOC, which is a consortium for the MPOs, which is where the elected officials are. One of the things that they did, I think it's been 2 or 3 years, and Paul can correct me, but actually UMPOC decided with some of the planning funds that they get, they took some money off the top and really have identified part of a position to really coordinate. So Paul will come to some meetings, and his job is to really take that information out and share it with all the MPOs. So I think that that has really sort of increased our coordination. And then obviously the work that Jeff does with his MPOs. So really just trying to send the message that we really try to coordinate our work as much as possible. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff.
Good afternoon, Chair Baney, Commissioners. My name is Jeff Flowers. I'm the Program and Funding Services Manager for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Before I get started on the presentation, there's 2 other folks that were part of the team, Karen Odenthal from Salem MPO and Dan Callister from the Eugene. Yes, we did. And we're missing one individual, which is Ted Liebold from Metro. He was also a member of this group that came to this process. Unfortunately, he decided vacation was a little more important. So a little context as we get going here. First slide is basically a yearly look of what we have in the STIP between what is the state program and what is the local program. The bar across is what we get about average on the federal program. The local program makes up about 30% or the dark box, and the state is the light box. The left side represents what is the target of our normal world. The right side is the actuals that have been occurring historically for 20 years. As you can see, there's a gap there between what our federal obligation requirements are and what we're actually doing. And that gap is being filled right now currently by ODOT. To give you numbers perspective, the state target at 70% is about 350. Local target would be about 150, but the actual obligations average out to be about 425 for us and 75 million for the locals. So, as a group for the last little over 2 years, we've been working on working towards a solution and trying to figure out what the right mix of balance is to move this forward. All 4 agencies have agreed that this is something that's extremely important to move things forward because at the end of the day, everybody wants transportation projects out for the public. What you see in front of you is a table, and what that represents is where our time period of metrics are going to begin, what the ideal target is, and what the minimum target is, and I'll explain both of them for you. The ideal target is what they should be doing, and that's the goal to hit. Minimum target is what we're going to be considered for success. And then you'll see the incentives category. So with meeting the minimum, but trying for the ideal, you're going to get rewards or penalties. The first 2 3-year sequences, just rewards are on the table. The idea behind that was to make sure that we are working towards a successful process to facilitate the change that we need to. Identify new solutions, identify efficiencies, et cetera, without putting at risk the idea of penalties to begin with. Then we'll be getting into the penalties in the 2022 to 2024 time period moving on, as well as you can see the ideal targets are ramping up as we go through time. We chose a 3-year time period because we all recognize that construction owns anywhere between 65 to 80% of the money. So depending on a year where things stack up in the wrong favor, we felt a 3-year time period would provide a better soft balance to be able to look at that time so that the MPOs had a fair shake at being able to do and get their projects out the door. So the next piece I'm going to talk about is the rewards. So if you look at the left side, that's our formula funding, and then I've provided to you what the Portland, Salem, and metropolitan areas look like from their percentage of the pie. On the right side is the redistribution number that the agency received last year. So I'm using that just as a kind of a baseline to kind of give you guys the perspective of what would happen. But with the rewards comes us sharing the redistribution with the TMAs in their fair share of what they get yearly. And as you can see, it comes out to about 8.24, oops, I hit that too quickly, 1.21 and 1.26%. And then the numbers that equate to that. So Portland would get 4.2 million, 630,000 for Salem, 657,000 for Eugene. They would then be able to do the same thing that ODOT does, which is define new projects and be able to operate and be able to move forward additional projects at their desire and at their policy committee's decision. And to kind of move forward, so the penalties. We've agreed to a 3-strike penalty process, and to kind of walk you through the numbers. So if you look at strike 1, their target in a 3-year time period was $15 million. To be successful, they had to do 80%. That's $12 million. In this circumstance, they only obligated 11.25, which results in a penalty because they didn't equal the $12 million. What's the penalty? 25% of the amount obligated minus what you have, or excuse me, let me rephrase that, the unobligated amount. You're not going to be penalized for what you did. You're only penalized for what you haven't done. So in that 3-year time period, you would have been penalized, the TMA would be penalized $937,500. Follow up to a strike 2, strike 3, as you can see the math. So give you a scenario where in the first 3-year time period, let's say that TMA X has missed the mark and they're going to be penalized at $937,000. The next 3-year period, they make it. They're going to get their redistribution because the next 3-year metric has been made. They have success. Plus, they're going to remove a strike. So there is a benefit, almost a 2-tiered positive to this, that they can remove strikes with good behavior. And so we're trying to, again, trying to make this successful, not try to hit to the penalty side, because this is all about getting money out, not taking money away. So, but if you go 3 straight years of having problems, you're going to be at strike 3, which means it's going to take you 3 years to get back to strike 0. So the next steps, we are here to ask for us to move forward with a memorandum of understanding between ODOT and MPO to give you a couple things that will be included in the MOU, some basic understanding and a creation of some exemption rules and processes. As we all recognize, and over the years all of you have heard, real life happens to projects. There's things that you can't pick up in scoping, and there's things that happen when you're in design, when you start doing more coring work and other things. You just find stuff that's just not available to us at the front end. So we've offered up an exemption process for the committee. We'll form a committee. I'll get to that in just a second, but there's exemption rules to remove that number from the math so that, again, we're working towards success because Mother Earth came into play, acts of God, different types of delays. There's money that, we faced the first one in 2021 since the FAST Act at the federal level expires. We don't know whether we're going to get more money or less money, so we'll adjust accordingly. And we'll deal with the more money situation as a separate conversation amongst us because they do have to forecast out, no different than we do, to figure out what is available for them to start doing projects. So it's kind of hard for us to go, oh, by the way, you got an extra $5 million. What are you doing with it tomorrow? And ding them with that. So that just doesn't feel like the right thing to do moving forward towards success with that. An exception committee is planning to be formed. We are going to have options for that committee as far as forming a charter. Current proposals for a 7-member committee, 2 members from each of the TMAs and 1 member from ODOT. The initial thought process is that a TMA that brings forward an exception would not be allowed to vote, which always leaves us in a majority vote because we all have odd number of people voting. And with that, I know that the MPOs have a few things that they would like to chime in on and share, and then I can get to any questions that you may have.
Thank you. So I've been working for the MPO for about 25 years doing transportation planning and project development, now the director for the last 14 years. And just as kind of a background, MPOs are responsible for working with our local agencies on project selection to use the federal funds, the SDP funds, the CMAQ funds, and other funds. They put in the TIP and the STIP, and we continue working with those agencies after it's programmed to make sure that projects develop. And as Jeff just said, projects end up slipping sometimes. Instead of a project going year 1, 2, and 3, it might be 1, 3, and 4. And so we are obligating our funds. It's just not obligating in the original year that we had programmed. So that's the issue. It's not that our projects aren't getting done. It's just because of circumstances that could be a variety of things, they might slip a phase from one year to the next. So regarding the proposal, as Jeff said, we've taken about 2 years to get to the point we're at today. I think these discussions have helped to understand each agency's perspective on the issue, as well as the practices we need to change for all of our parties to succeed. And over these 2 years, we've worked through some very complicated issues. There had to be some compromises by ODOT and the TMAs to get to the proposal. But we've also developed processes for the exceptions. And just also, Jeff didn't mention this, but discuss ways for ODOT and the TMAs to assist each other to reach those targets. So those get into the weeds, but ways of sharing money or doing other things so that we could get to those obligation targets. And we've also agreed to revisit the agreement in the future to make adjustments as we learn what we are now on the threshold of engaging in. So Jeff's presentation showed what we've collectively agreed to so far. There are still some details to work out, but I see us getting to the finish line sometime this year on an agreement. We've done a lot of work over the last 2 years. So in Salem-Keizer, I presented this to our own policy committee committee of elected officials, and Jeff and I have met with our local public agency managers and staff that actually deliver these federal projects to go through what this new paradigm looks like. There have been some concerns about the issue that I want to briefly share. One is the impact of the potential penalties on our projects in general programming. So you saw in the presentation that it could be in the multi-million dollars, and that's a concern. And also that circumstances beyond local agencies or the TMA's control, which might be in our region, we've had a lot of turnover of local agency liaisons that assist the local agencies in processing this. That's something that happens, of course, but how do we work through these issues? And those kind of things might trigger a penalty, so we need to work through those. I think the exception rules that we're developing and the processes that I briefly mentioned will address those two concerns. But that is what this group, the TMAs and the ODOT, will be evaluating as I said, the agreement gets put into practice. In that vein, I see 3 crucial actions that are needed after the agreement is finalized and signed. One is local agencies need to be more diligent on our project scoping and schedules and budgets. We've been doing that for SCATS for a number of years to improve the scoping and budgets, and we're even doing more on this cycle, the 21-24 STIP cycle, to do more reviews and criteria. And I'm also on the ODOT's Process Improvement Subcommittee to recommend further improvements in scoping so that getting projects at the very beginning scoped right, budgeted right, scheduled right, and then commitments to do that will help us meet these targets. We've also discussed how ODOT and the TMAs need better tracking tools. Right now we have some information, but these projects touch a lot of agencies and a lot of individuals, and we need to know where projects stand. And then finally, ODOT is obviously a very large organization, and we need to get the message out about these obligation targets to all ODOT staff that assist local agencies with project development and the obligation of federal aid projects. So they are aware that the paradigm is shift. We're not going to want to have projects slip. We want to keep to our schedules to make these targets, and everyone has to be aware and conscious of us trying to do those changes in practices that get us to our targets. So I'll say that's it.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'll start off by clarifying that although Jerry suggested I have no corrections to what she said. I agree with both Jerry and Jeff that this has been a good process over the past couple of years, and I don't have a lot to add to what Mike said. Our MPO has had a presentation with Jeff coming down to talk to our local agency and MPO staff, and while certainly there are some concerns and some qualms about obviously the penalty side, perhaps more than the reward side, and making this work, everybody does believe that this is a good direction for us to move to reach success. The issue that I want to, perhaps state the obvious is that the MPOs are responsible for this federal money, but the majority of that money is not programmed for projects that the MPOs deliver. It's programmed for projects that the local jurisdictions that are members of the MPO deliver, the cities, the counties, transit district, etc. And so when that money is programmed for those local jurisdictions, the MPOs in the past have had really little role and little tools, very little, that they could do to help those local agencies deliver those projects. As Mike said, we want to make sure that as part of this, those local agency staff and the ODOT staff that work with them, the local agency liaisons and others, have the knowledge and the tools to help everybody reach success on this. That's critical, that is not just rules that are put in place for the people at this table, but it's rules put in place for the people in the field getting these projects delivered, getting them obligated and delivered. So again, I will say that our MPO is supportive of this. We certainly are going to want to keep an eye on how it works out, and there may be adjustments necessary. We have agreed, as Mike said, and I think Jeff said, to continue to meet, not only to look at the overall process and agreement as necessary, but the exceptions committee that Jeff indicated will be formed is going to meet initially for the first couple of years, at least every other month. And I expect that there may be more than just exceptions that committee might end up discussing. There may be things that come up that committee at least brings to the table and gets discussed there or elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the commission. I'm going to bring a little different perspective. First, Portland Metro MPO supports this, and I thank you for the opportunity to be at the table to help develop this. I grew up in the California Federal Transportation Project Delivery System. California is a little more spirited in its way it does things. It's a nice way to say we fight among ourselves a lot down there over the money. And when we got obligation targets thrown down at us, we didn't have much say. The MPOs weren't at the table, the county transportation commissions weren't at the table, FHWA just came in, there it is. We weren't given much flexibility. We weren't given carryover. We weren't given rewards. Actually, the only reward we had was no punishment. That was hard to swallow because I did very well in my county being able to obligate anywhere between 88 to 92% on average every year. But because I couldn't carry over the funds to next year of what I didn't obligate, I lost on average about $3 million every year. No matter what I did, I couldn't win. I couldn't beat, come up as a victory. This program, though, even though we have still a lot to work out, a lot of business processes to define, coordination, communication. For example, in the metro area, we've spent 3 years working between Region 1 and Metro on an interactive process on amendments and project delivery where we communicate a lot more. And it's forced a change in the paradigm. That's taken a while just to get that thinking to change. This new program offers that change in a paradigm, which I believe Oregon does need. And it will take us, though, probably another 2, maybe 3 years to really refine it. Some things we're going to propose will work great. Some things just, we're going to go, well, let's try something else. It's going to be, trial by fire. But the key is we're trying to protect the funds and make sure we never lose anything. So I am very thankful for the opportunity to be part of this process.
Let me go to my colleagues. Do you have questions or comments? The request is for us to approve this plan, the implementation plan, but it sounds like there is still yet to be some bow tying on this in terms of it being finalized. What type of opportunity does it afford? And I'm thinking back to CMAQ. Things went along really well until we got right to the final meeting. And so when you're tying that bow, sometimes it can go really well and sometimes it doesn't go really well and it takes you a little longer and it changes. So what type of flexibility does this afford this group in order to get to that finish line?
Chair Boehne, Commissioners, I think that we have really low risk on this one. So the group we're just making sure we get everything documented the right way.
Okay.
So that way we're able to move it forward. We've gone through pretty much all the scenarios, and I will allow them to chime in if they think a little bit differently, but we're just talking about let's make sure we document this and that we're very, very clear so whoever comes in behind us or next to us, whatever, knows exactly what the situation is.
Okay.
So we're literally right at that point of going, okay, we're making sure we capitalize the right things, add a few extra words just for clarity at this point, and making sure that it's very, very clear to that point. The only thing that could be a little bit of a tricky situation will be the committee itself, and if they take a different route on something after getting them together. Okay. That's the only risk that I see, but we're going to be walking in as a group and being able to say, here's where we think you should go. How do we want to vote may come up as far as what we suggest to them. They may decide to go with a different style. there's things to be discovered there, and then just document that. But as far as the rest of the work goes, pretty sure we're at that point where it's just documentation and making sure we line it out. And we've got the exceptions. Let's review this at this time to ensure that the math is working correctly. And we're having those check-in points, and we've agreed to those already. We just need to put it in paper at this point.
Okay.
And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the key is that if the commission supports Table 1.
Correct.
That's really what we're looking for. And so that then the agreement that will be signed by the gentleman sitting at this table will really sort of put that in place, solidify what that looks like. And if for any reason as they go through that work and they want to change the targets, then I would say we would probably be coming back to you. But how we actually implement these targets is I think, the bow
Correct.
that Jeff is referring to.
Okay. And then the next question, success will hinge a bit on that local agency awareness that was raised. And so how do we make sure, because you can go through all of this work, but it'll be the MPOs that are shouldering the penalty, but the local, so what does that connection look like in terms of awareness and education of what this new format and commitment looks like? I know that some of you have taken this to your councils, but is that awareness piece will really determine the positive outcome.
Okay. Yes, we've taken it to our elected officials, and they support it. But mainly, we have to take it to the staff level. I had my first main presentation to the city of Portland with their engineering staff saying, guys, the rules have changed. You're going to be accountable for you're going to be accountable for this. This is how it's going to change. Metro is now going to be sticking its nose into some of the monitoring and doing things, in a positive way. We're trying to explain this is to help identify things. So there's a lot of communication that's required and education. We're going to be setting up probably specialized mini, hour-long workshops with the cities to go out and talk to them and say, this is what you can expect. If you're certified, here are the rules for you. If you're not certified, this is what you're going to have to do. It will force Metro to change some of our practices and how we award and consider projects too. So that's where a lot of this is going to change a lot of how we think about projects overall.
Great, that's helpful. Okay, so commission members, we have a motion to approve.
I move for approval of the proposed implementation plan for TMA obligation requirements, reward distribution, and penalties to ensure timely obligation of federal funds as illustrated under Table 1.
Great. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say that these conversations are not always easy. And so being at the table, I think that what you are showing is a great example of what it looks like to be in Oregon, where you try to figure it out and you come to solutions that'll be manageable, and that I think that commitment to the integrity of that process and the ability to share that common goal of service means a lot. So I just want to make sure that you know that we appreciate the partnership, and I recognize that behind this really positive discussion today, there may have been some spirited dialogue. So thank you very much for that commitment, and we appreciate you. I mean, maybe it went along just seamlessly and there wasn't, okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. All right, next on the agenda, we have a discussion about our innovative partnership program, and I am going to turn it over to Ms. Buck, or who would like to take the driver's seat? Ah, okay, wonderful. So, Galen, please. There you go.
All right, Chair Baney, members of the commission. My name is Galen McGill, Intelligent Transportation System Manager for ODOT, and I'll let Maureen introduce herself.
I'm Maureen Bach. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the Oregon Department of Transportation. You probably have seen me in previous iterations as the Orgo Program Manager, and I still have that on my plate as well.
So we're here to request enrollment of a connected vehicle ecosystem project in the Oregon Innovative Partnership Program. Enrolling the project in Innovative Partnership Program would provide the opportunity for ODOT to explore the opportunities that currently exist for collaborating with industry on a data processing infrastructure that will prepare ODOT for the future for both operating the transportation system and implementing a road usage charging program at scale. Connectivity and access to data are driving changes in many industries, so it's no surprise that that same change is coming to transportation. This trend was documented, I believe, in the Emerging Technology Impact Assessment work that was presented to the Commission not long ago. This project represents a key step in the building of a digital infrastructure to support a digitally connected transportation system for the future. So today's vehicles produce a lot of data from their onboard systems, and the sensors are on board, computing systems and networks. The promise of connected vehicle technology that's been demonstrated through various federal pilot projects has been the ability to harness this data for new and innovative approaches to monitoring and managing the transportation system. An estimate of data available from a single connected vehicle is in the neighborhood of 22 gigabytes per hour in terms of data production. And if you scale that to the majority of vehicles that are on the system at any time, it truly represents a massive amount of data. So and not many people are really looking for that massive pile of data, other than perhaps the researchers. So the concept of this connected vehicle ecosystem is a data processing platform that can combine all of this data from vehicles with other data from ODOT systems or other sources and transform it into insights and actionable, usable information. In the road usage charging context, it would be a platform that's able to aggregate vehicle mileage and make it available for the road usage charging concept. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Connected vehicles also present new ways to deliver information to vehicles. This project would also include working with the industry, vehicle manufacturers, et cetera, to identify key applications to assist drivers today and to support automated driving in the future.
So for a program like the Road Usage Charge Program, this would enable us to get data that we need to run a road usage charge program, which is typically mileage, fuel consumption, and the location in which the miles are driven. Get that data, have it aggregated by our business partners, our account managers, and have them do the taxing that is done to give us the revenue needed. As we know, some vehicles are now being manufactured without the onboard diagnostic port, and we know that plugging a device into an onboard diagnostic port long-term is not a solution for running a road usage charge program. So having this ecosystem available where data can be mined directly from the vehicle, aggregated by our business partners and result in a revenue stream for the Department of Transportation is a critical piece for us to grow the program to scale. It also means that other partners of ours in the RecWest arena that are looking to develop a road usage charge program can get that data through a clearinghouse that we're going to be looking at developing next year. And then that also allows us to give that access to in an open platform arena to other people who can develop APIs that can be used by those vehicles driving on our infrastructure.
Finally, I'll share a couple examples, and this is by no means a comprehensive list, but a few illustrative examples of how this system would help out. And these are a few examples from our statewide ITS plan. So the first is identifying and providing warnings related to hazardous conditions. Currently, our monitoring of conditions is dependent upon discrete sensors at discrete locations. This connected vehicle technology will provide a much more comprehensive view of hazards existing on the system with the ability to provide warning messages. And I think signalized intersections, obviously, is representing a conflict point in the transportation system. They're a key opportunity for connected vehicle technology to improve safety, prevent crashes, reduce emissions, and possibly develop some new innovative approaches to arterial operations. The final example here is the ability to improve our algorithms for things like variable speed limits, queue warning, ramp metering, and other active traffic management solutions by supplementing our existing sensor systems with this more comprehensive data from connected vehicles. And it may also present some better ways for us to present the information to the vehicle itself through some of the connected vehicle technologies. And as I mentioned, these are just a few examples of the ways that this project could benefit the transportation system here in Oregon. And in addition, The system will provide comprehensive information about the transportation system that will be helpful in many other ways. So if enrollment is improved, the Office of Innovation will proceed with a request for proposals and to seek a partner for this project. So that's our presentation.
Okay.
Any questions?
So the information that's being, I'm thinking about the general public and the information gathering and how they may or may not feel about that. And so this is primarily just for the safety factors and improvement of awareness of vehicles. And so help me with the person that walks up and states, now you're collecting information that I wouldn't want you to share with partners. And is there what type of checks and balances are put into place to make sure that that information that's being collected is not being used in a different way than the general population might want it to be used?
I think there's two parts to that question. I'll address the first part related to mobility and safety applications, which really there's no identifiable information needed. It's all anonymized, aggregated data, probably processed through the OEM. So it's really not really anything identifiable to the individual. But obviously for road usage charging, that has to be different. It has to be tied to a vehicle, and obviously that's been a big part of the road usage charge program.
So as you may recall, Senate Bill 810 actually put in place some privacy protections for people that are enrolled in the program. And we have been very mindful as we've implemented that and gone forward that those privacy protections stay in place. So as you note, mileage data and that kind of thing is required to be done at the VIN level in order to administer the program, but that data is not available to law enforcement without a warrant, and it is required to be disposed of within 30 days after account settlement, absent some reason to maintain it longer, like a dispute over a charge. So we actually do not see that information in the Orgo program. That is all aggregated by our account managers. So the traveling public that enrolls in the program deals with a third party. They don't deal directly with the state.
Very good. And I've been a member of the pilot program, and my father said, they'll know when you're speeding. And in fact, they don't. So, so it's safety first, right? But I think it's important to put on the record that we are mindful of those, that privacy does matter, and that, anyway, I just thank you so much for answering those questions. Please.
I have an off-the-wall question. Given that these systems have the ability to communicate to you while you're driving, does this add to distracted driving? I mean, I used to drive over the road, heavy truck, and you paid attention to the speed limit and you paid attention to the road and everything else, and there wasn't something talking to you unless you had the radio on. And I look at all of this and I think, all this data coming in, how am I going to focus on what the job is, which is to drive the vehicle down the road safely?
A very good question, and I think it's an area of continued research. Obviously, I think for this part, it's mostly implemented by the auto industry themselves, how they integrate that into the vehicle cockpit, if you will, and finding ways to do that aren't distractive, that are insightful and able to be used by drivers without distracting them. And I think that's one of the importance of a concept like this, in the sense of natively embedding it in the OEM equipment versus, where we're at today, which is a lot of aftermarket stuff, cell phone based, that sort of thing, which has an even stronger potential, I think, for distracted driving. So it's obviously an area of concern, one that has to be monitored, but I think is something the auto manufacturers are already dealing with in terms of user interface, man-machine kind of interface design kind of concepts.
Thank you.
So the question before the OTC is whether or not we are approving the ability to add the connected vehicle ecosystem into the OIPP program. So I would welcome a motion if we are interested in moving in that direction, but not all at once.
Go ahead, Julie. You want to?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, with the rapid changes in society, heavily around technology, I would like to move to enroll a connected vehicle ecosystem as Oregon Innovative Partnership Program Transportation Project.
Excellent. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you so much, and thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have the consent agenda, which I'm sure everyone is here for. Just making sure everyone's awake.
You're fighting a lot of low blood sugar.
I know, right?
Out there.
Who wants cake?
Up here.
So, Mr. Deputy Director, I believe we have the consent agenda. Yes, no, it's just fine. Commissioner Brown.
We were talking about
we
signs
already-
in Myrtle
no,
Creek.
I was asking him why in Myrtle Creek it tells me how fast I'm going. How does it know? How does it know? It's because there's a radar in the sign.
In the sign.
Yeah.
In the sign. 'Cause
Okay.
I said, it flashes your speed up there. I won't see how fast it says I'm going. But, I was wondering how it knew.
Okay. Wonderful.
We've got that figured out. too.
Good, excellent. Okay, so
Yeah,
the
so-
consent agenda, I think it's pretty straightforward for you this month.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I move, ask the Commission's approval of the consent calendar. I have not heard any conflicts or concerns with the, anything on the consent calendar.
Okay,
Move approval of the consent agenda, Madam Chair.
excellent. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, now for the main event. We have received some information just this morning, and in light of that, we would like to take a break so that we can read that material. So we are going, I'm sorry? Well, and hopefully if there is a cake here, this would be the perfect time to go ahead and take a moment to celebrate Oregon's, ODOT's birthday, 50th birthday of being a transportation department. And we are going to, from the moment that we take this break, we are also then going to come back. We will have an executive session that we are going to talk about as well, and kind of let you know how we will orchestrate the rest of the afternoon. So with that, how about we go ahead and take maybe a 15-minute break? Please enjoy the lobby and celebrate Oregon's birthday, or ODOT's birthday, and we will be back with you in just a moment.
Commercial break.
Commercial break. Okay. We're gonna go find Bob.
So it's a hard.
Okay, welcome back. Just for the project sponsors, I want to let you know that each of you had submitted some last comments that were of a confidential nature, and we've had an opportunity to review those. Wanted to just say thank you for giving us a bit of a recess so that we could do so. We are going to go forward with identifying how the afternoon will play out. So, Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Eric Hovig, I'm the Planning Section Manager for ODOT, and we are back again with the Connect Oregon dedicated projects for the intermodal projects both in Mid-Willamette Valley and the Treasure Valley. Just to kind of reset the stage a little bit, project sponsors back in September submitted their project plans to ODOT. They were able to update those and modify those based upon some questions from our third-party consultant, Tioga. We brought that material before you in February, had a lot of conversations and kind of learned about what the projects were. From that, some questions came up around some more understanding around where are we at with the railroads and commitment and next steps. Project sponsors had an opportunity to answer those questions. We brought that material back to the commission in last month in June. Again, had an opportunity to go through that with our Tioga consultants. Project sponsors, again, had another opportunity to add any information they felt was needed. And the takeaway from June was that we really still hadn't answered that question around the economic viability and shipper viability question enough to really inform your decision. So the direction was to ask our project sponsors to come back this month or to prepare some materials before July 12th to respond to that question. All the project sponsors have provided that information. It's been reviewed by our Tioga consultants. A fair amount of that information was deemed as confidential. So we really want to be careful about how we engage in this conversation, so we're not disclosing any of those confidential materials as we move forward. However, those numbers and information are very vital to the decision that you have to make today. So with that, Madam Chair, I think that really tees us up for the discussion we need to have with Tioga. Probably before we introduce Tioga, I thought I'd let Sam Ziegler introduce himself. Sam will be kind of helping me through this process to make sure we catch all of our steps, and if there's any kind of questions back to statutory requirements or process requirements or anything else we need to do in our documentation. But Sam.
Okay. Madam Chair and the Commission, Sam Ziegler with the DOJ, here as needed to help.
Excellent. So I also want to note that we had put on our agenda that we may or may not go into executive session, and I want to let the group know that we will be. In order for us to ask questions about the confidential information that was submitted to Tioga, we want to keep that integrity of the information, which will require us to recuse ourselves from this room, have that offline conversation, and come back. And at that time, prior to that, I will read a brief script that allows us to do so. But just so that you know, it's a little bit of a orchestrating of making sure that we keep that information, the integrity of it as it should be, but affords us an opportunity to ask the questions collectively with Tioga as well. So with that, shall we go ahead? They are on the line.
We do have Dan Smith and Frank Harder with Tioga on the line. And I think we can turn it over to them, Madam Chair. And then before we break, we should also just validate that there are no conflicts of interest among the commission.
Oh, excellent. Let's go ahead and do that now. Thank you for keeping me straight. Do any of the commission members have an actual conflict of interest or a legally imposed fiduciary duty with respect to any of the project sponsors?
I do not have any of those.
Okay, thank you.
No.
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 And I do not. Okay, do you wish to declare any potential conflicts of interest with respect to any of the project sponsors?
No.
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 And I do not. And I think we should probably ask, would anyone like, typically wearing my county commissioner hat, you would ask, would anyone like to challenge that? Which I'm looking at Sam. Is that a question we should ask?
I don't think it's required, but you certainly
Okay.
can.
Okay. Would anyone like to challenge our ability to be objective? Okay, so let's go forward.
So, Madam Chair, with that, I think we can turn it over to Dan Smith and Frank Carter. Dan, maybe if you can just introduce yourself and Frank, and then we can turn it over to you for a really more of the high-level assessment of the materials that were submitted by the project sponsors. Again, just as we talked about, this is more of the high-level overview, not getting into the details of specific numbers or citations.
Sure. First of all, this is Dan Smith with Tioga, and can folks hear me there?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good. The sound is a little soft from the room. And then with me is Frank.
Good afternoon. Frank Harder here.
The folks at ODOT asked us to briefly summarize our findings from review of the materials that were submitted back on the 12th. Let me start with the Treasure Valley Reload Center. The TVRC proposal, as it now exists, is essentially two projects in one. The sponsors are proposing to build a cold storage and rail car loading facility at NYSA and to lease or buy a fleet of refrigerated rail cars to support improved rail service for the Treasure Valley shippers. The cold storage facility itself is essentially an economic development project, and we didn't try to assess the economics of that. We focused our analysis on the transportation aspects of the rail service. Now, based on the July 12th submissions, the sponsors have clearly made a lot of progress. They have schedules and rates from UP and reasonable estimates of rail car costs. We've not tried to verify those figures independently, but they seem reasonable to us, and the economics hang together. The service they're proposing would be positioned between the Cold Connect service, which is now offered by UP at Wallula, and the Manifest Rail service, which UP offers for the existing shipper locations in Treasure Valley. The service would be slower than the Cold Connect service, but would also be less expensive and would not require them to truck the product up to Wallula. By providing the rail cars, the proposed service would get a discount from UP's existing Treasure Valley rates, and equally important, would also have a more consistent equipment supply. So although there is still some work to be done on the updated financials and service details, the basic rail service concept appears feasible, and it has very strong support from shippers due to the potential for their cost savings and improved service. Now, on Brooks and Millersburg, the two Willamette Valley proposals have also made progress, but there's still some critical information gaps. Unfortunately, neither project has been able to obtain actual rail rate quotes, and some of the other cost factors are still estimates rather than actuals. Moreover, the information presented to date, including the July 12th information, indicates that neither service is going to be able to compete for significant business volumes. Basically, unsubsidized rail intermodal service simply cannot compete with trucks on a 75-mile trip from Millersburg to Portland, on a 50-mile trip from Brooks to Portland, or even on a 200-mile trip from Brooks to Seattle. Not only would those services have to meet trucking costs, they'd have to be below the trucking costs to attract new business. They will be slower, inevitably, and they may not operate every day. And moreover, the truckers are going to cut their rates to keep the business. So the rates today would be lower on the day that those intermodal services started up. The lack of actual rail rates also really creates substantial risk because we don't know if the estimates in the recent submissions are even attainable. The existing NWCS and BNSF services between Portland and Seattle or Tacoma can only compete with trucks because they're offered at below cost by the ocean carriers. And there's been no indication the ocean carriers are willing to do the same for services down to the Willamette Valley. Lynn County has offered a limited startup subsidy for the Millersburg service, but we do not know if it would be enough, and there's no agreement to make the subsidy permanent. So despite what we believe to be the diligent and good faith efforts of everybody involved, the underlying economics of these proposals will simply not generate a substantial volume of business in competition with trucks and existing rail services. So with that, we'd be happy to take questions or go into more detail.
Commission members, do you have questions for Tioga? Okay. I do not see any questions. Okay. Or questions that we can ask right now and without being in executive session. So I think I'll go forward and go ahead and read this unless you have any other comments that you'd like to make.
Madam Chair, I think we're ready for breaking into executive session.
Okay. So the commission will now meet in executive session pursuant to ORS 192662F, which allows the commission to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection, including information submitted in confidence relating to the Connect Oregon multimodal project proposals. Representatives of the news media and designated staff and DOJ counsel shall be allowed to attend the executive session, which will be held in the basement conference room B02A and B. All other members of the audience will please remain here. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about these subjects during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision will be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we will return to this room and an open session. Okay.
And Madam Chair, we do need Tioga, Dan, and Frank. If you can hang up, and we will be joining you again shortly on the same number.
Okay, we call in a couple minutes?
Yeah, it'll take us about 2 or 3 minutes to get
Okay,
downstairs.
thank you.
Walter, we call in though, okay?
No problem.
Okay. Okay. I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Eric, and I believe we have our partners and Frank from Tioga. Okay, wonderful.
Yes, we're back on, or at least I am.
Okay, excellent. So if we have
Frank's
questions.
on too.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, thank you. That really brings us now to decision time. And so I'll refer you to attachment 3, I think it is. This is the decision framework that we all agreed we would utilize to help walk through and make a final determination of yes or no to a specific project plan. So I want to walk through this real quick before we actually take one of the projects through. So as you recall, there's a 3-step process that we outlined in the decision framework. The first step is really around that commitment from the railroad, as well as now more of the recent economic viability, shipper viability of the proposal and of the project. So the 2 questions that we kind of flagged to help inform this: did the project sponsor provide the requested information back from March as well as from the June meeting? Did they get the right level of commitment from the rail entities and support? And then if the project sponsor provided that information, does the OTC find that they have demonstrated clear, reasonable, and likely path towards approval and service approval by the railroads, as well as a path forward towards viability now around the economic and shipper viability question? So that would be step 1. Step 2, if you so deem a specific project, it passes through that screen. Gets more to the overall benefit to the state of Oregon. And again, this is based upon their original materials back from September, as well as all the other supplemental things that have come in over the last number of months. And again, we have 4 kind of questions to help guide this. They're not all inclusive. There could be other factors for you. But does the project have a reasonable likelihood of success? And I think that's really one of the heart and soul questions for you to be considering. Have they demonstrated that there is a likely path forward for these projects to truly be viable? Is there a reasonable potential to provide an overall benefit to the freight transportation system for Oregon? So is this going to improve the freight transportation system in the state? Is this a good investment from a transportation perspective? Is there a reasonable potential to provide overall positive economic benefit to the state? So this is where you can start to consider those other economic benefit perspectives. You know, is this going to be maybe a catalyst for additional development or future development and help grow businesses and job growth in different areas of the state? And then, is the business case worthy of the investment of public funds? We always have to remember, we've had this conversation. These are Connect Oregon funds. These are coming from lottery-backed bonds and privilege funds. These are the public dollars. Is this a good investment of those public dollars? So that's kind of the step 2 screen for us to go through. And if there's a yes to that, then we can move to step 3. Step 3 is really to kind of help do the final check. And we're going to take these Treasure Valley and we'll walk it all the way through separately from the 2 intermodal facilities in the Mid-Willamette Valley. The projects are different enough. We just don't want to get them confused with each other. But step 3 can really be a tool to help you both for Treasure Valley say, is there any other fatal flaws that we may have missed? Is there something that's causing us concern? It's not ready, or it's just not really worthy of the investment. Hopefully we've answered most of those questions through step 1 and 2 when we come to Treasure Valley. For the Mid-Willamette Valley, this tool really might be a useful thing if we get to both Millersburg and Brooks being viable projects moving forward. This might be a real way to compare one versus the other over key factors and values that we've talked about for multiple meetings. And again, we have the score sheet and the scoring and ranking to help inform that. I will note that the step 3 considerations document is the same that we had for last month in June. And I do know we heard from the project sponsors that there was some concern with some of those ratings and scoring back from June. We did not go through and try to update that because this was a coordinated effort with our sister agency, Business Development Department. And we did this based upon a lot of the information that we came in more from their September materials and early on in the year. So we do acknowledge there are probably some of the scores that have changed over time. One of the ones I would simply point to, I think, in the NISA for the Malheur County proposal, the city of NISA has completed the land use activities for the NISA proposal. So they are now zoned appropriately as industrial land. When we did this, there was still some confusion if that had fully been completed because it wasn't part of the September materials. So we can, again, take that into consideration if we get projects that go that or proposals that go that far. So with that, I really think we should just jump right on into the decision framework unless there's any final questions from the commission before we start. Okay, so I think we'll start right with Treasure Valley. Treasure Valley, we've talked about the proposal is to build really more of a reload facility. Taiga Group has really talked about it has a function as a cold storage as well as a reload facility for onion shippers to get their commodities mainly to the Midwest and the East. And so really the question now for the commission is they have provided a letter from Union Pacific around service and what kind of commitment to service they will have. The materials that Tioga has reviewed that we just went over downstairs, as well as the overview earlier up here, identify that the project has gone through and developed cost estimates for rail, as well as utilizing rail cars and other factors, and come up with general statements that support that it does look economically like there's some potential. So the real question for number one is, do you believe that the Treasure Valley reload facility has demonstrated enough information to pass those two tests on step one around shipper viability, economic viability, as well as the commitment from the railroad entities serving the property or serving the project?
Commission members? And you can also, if you have general comments that you want to make about a specific project that may be more overarching, I would also take those too. So with, in reference to Treasure Valley.
So thank you, Madam Chair. And before I comment on Treasure Valley, I want to start by thanking the project sponsors and supporters on these three projects for all of their time and effort in bringing these forward. It's clear that you've spent a lot of time and energy on them, and it's been a very conscientious and thoughtful set of applications that have been brought to us. So I also want to thank Tioga and the department and the Department of Justice for their assistance throughout. And I know this is stretched on for a while, but these are important decisions. And we want to make sure that we're being thoughtful in reviewing and asking questions and trying to get to good decisions. So with that as a general comment, I would say with respect to the Treasure Valley project, with the latest submission, which we've received, combined with prior information, I believe that the project has provided strong cost information, rate information, both with respect to rail and shippers. And I'll just quote from our own consultants' most recent memo, which is that Tioga has concluded that the Treasure Valley project has a reasonable chance of operational and economic viability. So I agree with that, and I think it's a project that we should approve.
Okay. Comments, please.
Well, I'm very pleased to look at the latest information from Treasure Valley and Malheur County, and I'm pleased that they have all stepped up to provide what's needed, especially on the rail car issue. I think those are important things, and I think that's a project that it at least meets step one.
Okay. Please.
I concur with both of those comments, Madam Chair.
I too concur. I think that It was well said what you said, Commissioner Van Brocklin, and again, we just thank everyone for the extra work. This is not an easy decision for any of us. And so we appreciate the additional information, I think. I appreciate it, although it's been very, very difficult.
And I think affording that extra time has brought forward more information that helps us to make a decision. And I think while we don't want to be entirely risk adverse, we want to be able to take the appropriate calculated risks. And with the information that's been submitted, I think it affords us the opportunity to feel confident that they've met that bar. So go right
Okay.
ahead.
So I'm hearing a support for passing the step 1 part of the process. So now I'll call the question for step 2, which is really more about that overall economic benefit to the state, overall viability, good investment. My simple term, if this is kind of the gut check, is this really a good investment of $26 million minus the project plan phase that we've done for the state of Oregon to build a reload facility for Treasure Valley?
Maybe I'd ask it this way. Would anyone disagree with that statement?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so moving ahead, the scoring matrix for step 3, you have this in front of you. Again, we would call attention to the site, the land use compatibility issue, because now that it has changed. Overall, looking at this, I think it's showing that the project is ready, or about as ready as it can be within the confines of the process so far. About the only area, again, from the staff perspective that we called a little bit of attention to is around what happens if the Union Pacific model changes, and what kind of options do we have. So again, railroad service, you can't guarantee 100% for the long-term future. So that does open up a little bit of potential risk for Treasure Valley out in the eastern part of the state, UP served. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a fatal flaw. It's how you judge that. So in looking at the overall readiness, benefit to the state, the potential catalyst, and even other values around how we value land and good use of land, if you feel this is a good investment, I think we're ready to entertain a motion to approve, I believe, the facility for Treasure Valley.
I think it would be beneficial for myself and maybe another colleague, if you want to nod, help us with the next phase, both, and it would factor into if we were to approve another project as well, what that looks like. We also have a milestone outline, so that it is not as though Ed McMahon walks in and we have a large check and we just hand it over. There's a little bit more that is to it, so.
Madam Chair, absolutely. So in following with the discussions we've had, I believe, for a number of months, and clear back to former Director Garrett talking about this back in February, we've heard very clearly from the Commission that even if we approve a project plan for any of the project sponsors, we need to move forward in an incremental approach. This is not just approve the plan and here's the money, go build the facility. So we've worked very closely with the Department of Justice, our staff here at ODOT, and others to develop what we believe is a framework for beginning those negotiations with project sponsors to take that incremental approach, to make sure they're getting the money they need to do the next phase of their development, whether that's design, getting operator agreements, or other kind of issues taken care of, but maybe not issuing money to purchase right-of-way yet, or to begin construction. And then when do we need to get the final numbers? One of the things we heard very clearly from Tioga back in June is until you actually have the real negotiated rates and the actual numbers and everything really settled in, you won't be able to do a 100% apples-apples comparison. So that might be another milestone we want to do after they really get their design fine-tuned and get all their approvals from the railroads, to have that kind of a check-in again. Let's make sure the financials are still working. And then maybe it's moving into the right-of-way phase while you finish up design and obtain all your permits, and then finally construction. So that's kind of a high-level thought process that we've brought to this. And I think it is also important for the Commission to determine the level of role you would like to have in looking at how we set up that incremental approach.
Okay, very good. And I know that we've had a conversation with Interim Director Mather as well about that. And so that would be something that we would essentially stage gate as the Commission going forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the intent of this is to really make sure we are getting all those approvals. So if something did not go right, we have a way of saying, let's not build the facility and have it not be functional.
Sure.
Nobody wants that. I think the project sponsors would agree with that. But how do we make sure that we're moving forward in a way to get to those answers to make sure it is still the good investment?
Excellent. Thank you for that clarity. So with that, I would welcome a motion if someone would like to move this project forward or not.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the project plan for the Treasure Valley Intermodal Facility located in Nissa, sponsored by the Malheur County Development Corporation, subject to the following conditions. 1, the execution of an agreement with ODOT and approved by the Oregon Transportation Commission on terms and conditions acceptable to the department, the applicant, and the commission. 2, that the agreement shall include a project schedule with due dates and estimated costs for project milestones. 3, that the project agreement further require that the project sponsor return to the commission for additional authorization to receive funds for key project milestones, including the acquisition of the property upon which the facility will be constructed, the commencement of facility construction, and other approvals which are identified in the project agreement. No funds for those aspects of the agreement which require commission approval may be dispersed until the sponsor obtains such separate commission approval.
Okay, and I would welcome a second.
A
please.
second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, and thank you again to the project sponsor for Treasure Valley. Congratulations.
So now we'll move to the Mid-Willamette Valley. For the Mid-Willamette Valley, we have 2 project sponsors. One is the location in Brooks. That facility is off of Brook Lake Road and River Road in the community of Brooks. The other facility is Millersburg, located between I-5 and Salem Road. Both facilities are intermodal facilities, so Treasure Valley is more of a reload facility. This is an intermodal facility, moving intermodal containers. Our Tioga consultants have talked to us, I think, many times about what the differences there are to those kind of projects and proposals, which is why I think taking these together makes a little bit more sense. So again, coming back to the framework, what I would propose is that we take both these together simultaneously. We'll call a question on each one for step 1. Okay. And then if both pass through step 1, then we'll go down to step 2. Again, if both pass through all those steps, then we'll use the step 3 evaluation criteria scoring matrix as a possible way to differentiate. As a reminder, again, the commission is not able to authorize funding for both projects. We are limited to building, if we approve any, only one project in the Mid-Willamette Valley. So if we do get to approval, we will have to have one that gets approved and one not approved at the end of the day. The other option is if neither pass through those screens around this evaluation framework, the answer could be to deny both project plans. But we can't keep both of them going forward. So just with that as a caveat.
And if we were to deny both projects, what happens to the funds?
What happens to the funds that were dedicated to those projects?
Correct.
I believe, to the best of my knowledge, that those funds are part of the Connect Oregon program already and would remain in the Connect Oregon fund available for other distribution by the commission.
Excellent. So in case someone's wondering in the room, if it goes to another highway project or something along that line, it stays within that fund and it would go back into that fund.
No, by statute, those funds are still part of the Connect Oregon program. And Sam, is there anything I missed on that?
I see a head nodding.
Yeah, I'm nodding in agreement. Yes, so any funds that don't go to an intermodal facility are distributed as part of the competitive Connect Oregon program.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think we'll just take them in order. So we'll start with the Brooks proposal. For the Brooks proposal, we're back to the step 1 considerations. So again, back to those step 1 considerations, they were asked to obtain clear commitment and understanding of commitment of service from the railroad and railroad operators that would be serving the facility, as well as now the most recent information around the shipper and economic viability. And so I know we've had a lot of discussion with Tioga earlier, and we've had the reports presented to you around that most recent, and you had the reports from Tioga around the commitment level from the railroads back in June. So with that, I would just ask the question is, in your opinion, does the Brooks proposal pass through the step one consideration?
Comments by the commission members? Please.
I'm concerned about this project in that the original submittal as part of their application talked about accessing both Seattle and Tacoma, and I don't see this project moving forward to achieve that goal.
Okay. Other specific comments? And I think we will start with the first stage gate, which essentially is that commitment with rail. I think that one of the challenges that has come forward is that we started a project with BNSF and Portland Western, and have now gone to a commitment with the potential of UP, which it's my understanding that also there is a waiver that is possibly necessary from BNSF as well, unless I'm not understanding that correctly. And so I would note that I do not see in the supplemental information the information that would state that BNSF has granted such a waiver or has signaled that they would be providing service. And I'm asking that as a, unless I have missed something in the proposal. Okay.
Well, I would just add, Madam Chair, that let me just step back from the matrix for a second and make this comment, which is, which you opened with, and that is that, and this could have happened on the east side as well, but it didn't. We have multiple applicants, and the statute is quite clear that we're either to award one award in the Treasure Valley area or none. And we've just made a decision and awarded, approved a plan for a project, the Treasure Valley project that we have had under consideration. On the west side, we have two applicants. Statute does not allow us to approve two projects. We can either approve one project or neither of the projects before us. Inherent in that is not just the question of the about the qualifications of each project. It also just inherently requires us to do some kind of comparative analysis, because even if both have attractive features and might work, we have to assess them against one another, because we're not allowed to approve two of them under state law. We're allowed to approve one of them or neither of them. It's binary, 0 or 1. So as we go through this conversation about these two projects, and we're now on the question of rail service, my own personal view is that while there are questions still for both projects, the Millersburg project, so I'm bringing in the other project in order to do some comparative analysis here, is working with one railroad, Union Pacific, and the Brooks project is working with three railroads, PNW, UP, and BNSF. So that adds a level of complexity to the Brooks project. And in particular, I note the point you were just making, Madam Chair, about there is, I would say, inadequate information about the BNSF piece. So, and maybe some questions about the other two pieces. So as I'm thinking about it comparatively, I think one of these projects on that criteria is somewhat stronger than the other.
Are there comments? Okay.
So I just want to make sure we're really clear for the Brooks proposal is the decision from the Transportation Commission to not approve the project plan past the step one consideration. I'm trying to interpret what I'm hearing, but I want to be really clear.
Yeah, I would want to hear from others on that question.
Commissioner Brown?
I agree. I mean, it's very difficult for us to make a decision when there's not a commitment. And if you go back to the Treasure Valley, there was a commitment there. And so for me, looking at this, it's just, I don't see that commitment.
Okay. So then, so this is an important stage gate that has been explicit since February. So I would welcome a motion if someone wants to, or we can go on to Millersburg as well, or we can stay with Brooks at this point for this particular first question.
I guess my question, Madam Chair, would be, are there any other comments that people want to make about the Brooks project before we proceed to a vote? Any other observations that we want?
I mean, there's been more than enough time and information that's been invested into this, and I think there's still just a lot of ambiguities and gray that exists with this particular project, and I think that's where we stand.
Okay. I have a couple of general comments that I would add if we are moving forward in that direction. And I also want to, and I was going to say this at the end, but I think it is an important time to note that a lot of effort and energy has gone into these projects, and I don't want, this is a wonderful opportunity for Oregon to have this investment. And we have to be mindful of, again, as I mentioned before, we don't want to be risk adverse, but we also want to make the appropriate type of calculated decision going forward. A couple of outstanding pieces for me also in this particular submittal is the outstanding, having been 12 years as in elected office on the local level, taking land out of EFU. Exclusive farm use is one of the most restrictive zones in the state of Oregon and poses a significant challenge. I'm not saying that can't be overcome, but I do think that is another, as we're holding up two projects, that is an unfortunate category of land that poses a challenge, as noted. The other is the capacity around in terms of the current transportation facility and infrastructure. They're, adding additional capacity to that area is going to also, as I look at the capabilities of two projects balanced against each other, that's another piece that comes forward.
Yeah, I would just add to that these projects are not, one is not dramatically stronger than the other, but I think there is enough separation here with respect to where the rail situation sits and other factors, the land use designation, which may or may not be an issue, but is more problematic than being on industrially zoned and comp plan designated land. A couple of other things that are in the information we received, the terminal operator in the case of Millersburg it's got a strong track record, including assisting in negotiating rail fees, and so rail rates. And so I just think the Millersburg project is a little stronger than the Brooks project, all things taken together. So on balance, somewhat stronger. So with that, I guess I would proceed, and if you're ready for a motion.
Just on Brooks?
Yes.
Okay.
I would like, because I think we should take these separately, I would move that the commission deny approval of the project plan submitted by the Oregon Port of Willamette.
And that would require a second.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Look, okay. Okay, so now let's talk about Millersburg.
So
Same
again,
question.
Madam Chair, we laid out kind of what the Millersburg proposal is. Again, back to the overall framework. The first place maybe to start is, again, that letter or the commitment from the railroad, as well as the shipper and economic viability assessment that they just submitted materials on, and of which the Tiger Group has provided you input and information.
Okay. Comments? Please. Oop.
So on this project, I'm not prepared to approve the plan for this project today. I think there are questions about the submission that we've most recently received that require somewhat more attention. And I would suggest to the commission that we drill down a little bit more on some of the questions that come out of the submission that we need to spend a little bit more time with, and I'll be very specific about this so we all know what we're talking about here. And I'll do that in a second. But so my idea on this would be to continue the discussion about the Millersburg project and direct staff to have those discussions with the Department of Justice as necessary, and bring back a further update on progress, if any, to the August OTC meeting in Ashland on August 15th, 16th. The specific things I would be interested in knowing more about are more clarity on rail service, rail rates, shipper usage, shipping rates, and real estate and land use issues.
So let me, just to make sure that we are comparing the projects side by side. The first question that we are needing to answer would be, does the record have information that supports the first question, which is commitment by the rail? And if
So I would say that, to me right now, that's unclear.
Okay.
I need to know more.
Okay. The challenge is we
Have to say yes or no?
we do. So
Do we?
the letter that has been submitted, well, we should.
Okay, then I would say yes, subject to what I just said about a continuance. If what you're suggesting is we have to decide today, then I'm not prepared to decide today, so I would be a no vote today.
Okay, so let's walk back, and I'm looking at you, Sam, a little bit, only in that the letter that we have in the record for this particular project different than the project, and I'm trying to do an apple and an apple. We do have in the record a letter on the Millersburg project that outlines that UP is able to provide rail service and outlines some negotiations that are going to be required, but does state that there is the ability for and the desire to provide service. Is that the same that we found in the record of Brooks? And I would submit no from BNSF. So I think we're going to have to be crystal clear. Sam, am I correct?
Madam Chair, yes. So I think it's important that if the commission is inclined to give one of the sponsors more time, that there is a clear distinction as to why that is. Because and if I was hearing the commission correctly, Brooks was lacking certain information, i.e. the BNSF and perhaps other things. Millersburg may well be lacking its own set of information, But if we're going to only move forward with one and not the other for a continuance, there needs to be a good reason why that is.
Exactly.
So we need to articulate that for the benefit of everybody in the room and the record.
So if we feel that this letter answers the question as to whether or not UP is willing to commit to providing service. Now, the outstanding question, and both projects were at this challenging point of getting specificity around rates, was not able to happen because you don't know who's going to be the one at the altar. So I understand that that piece was more of an estimate versus actual costs, but have they met that criteria that they can be served by UP and that UP has signaled that they will provide that service?
And Madam Chair, I would also add, again, the railroad, I think, is an important part, but also that economic viability assessment, which is really the last part we just got in the shipper viability. And I think there was some good information shared from the Tiger Group as in relation to that as well. So it's really both the support of commitment from the railroad, but also that economic viability piece. So that's really that step one. I just want to point both those out.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe you could, what are you looking at?
The,
So I'd like to read what you're
There you
looking
are.
at so that I can answer the question.
and it is a good thing that trees are a renewable resource because I have
Two
a
trees
few
were-
of them right in front of me.
So I would say yes.
Okay.
I would also say that, you know, my biggest concern about Brooks on rail is BNSF because I see very little in the record and I don't see anything that looks like that.
Okay.
So that to me is the primary point of distinction, is that I don't see a similar submission on BNSF, which I understand is a part of the proposal on Brooks, which is how I got to where I personally got on that proposal.
And the
One of the things that got me there.
And I am trying not to break the seal on confidentiality. This document that I am looking at is one of the confidential documents, or I would be citing it and not kind of bumping around. So is it the will of the, or the, is there an agreement or not, or would, in terms of the commitment by UP to serve this facility? Is there, you had said yes, do you agree? Okay, so now we have clarity. So it sounds as though this project has in the record a document that outlines the commitment, of which that would be the distinction between this project and Brooks for that first stage gate. Now, economic viability, there were some estimates that are in the record. They are not necessarily, exact, and that I noted that as well. But if we get to the likelihood of economic viability with rates, is that something that we agree is within the record? And maybe I'm not asking the questions, I'm trying to guide us toward a decision here, and I feel like I'm maybe not doing a good job of that. If we, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I think we do have Dan and Frank on the phone. It may be prudent just to maybe ask them to restate their overall assessment, if that would be helpful, based upon the materials that were submitted most recently around that economic and shipper viability. I don't know if that would help or not, but again, it's coming down. Again, we have the project sponsors that did the due diligence, did a lot of great work. We've acknowledged that. We have a third-party consultant we brought in to help guide and advise the department as experts in this field. It's not uncommon for two professionals to have two different opinions.
Sure.
And I think that's really clear what we see in some of the materials. But I think it's coming down to where the Tiger Group and their recommendation, we can have Dan restate that versus the information that's provided by the project sponsor to, I think, maybe help answer that question.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that helps or not, but I'm trying to find a pathway here for us.
Okay.
Well, I guess the way I look at this is that if there's sufficient information today, we can approve. If there's insufficient information, we can deny.
Correct.
But it seems to me like there's something in the middle between those two. I take your point about distinction, and I think that's an important point that we need to make clear on the record, as clear as we can. But I also, the fact that I find this to be a stronger application than another application, and we have materials that have come in the last 48 to 72 hours that I haven't had a chance to thoroughly explore. I'm not ready to make either a yes or no decision on this project. I think it's a closer call. I was ready on Treasure Valley because there was enough there and I understood it well enough. So part of it may be that I, just need to spend more time on Millersburg's application. I didn't see enough to want to proceed on Brooks. So here, what I'm proposing is a continuance rather than an up or down decision in order to understand the application materials better and to perhaps get more clarity from staff. And in our decision matrix, continuance is one of the options. So I'm trying to go to door number 3.
Okay.
Now, if what I'm hearing is I can't go there, then I'll withdraw the idea and we can vote up or down on the application now.
Madam Chair, if I may. So I don't think there's anything that strictly prohibits the commission from doing what you're proposing, Vice Chair. That said, I think if there is a contemplation that one of the two Mid-Willamette Valley projects is going to get more time to provide more information for any one of the steps, whether it's step 2 or step 3, it would be, the best practice would be to give both projects the opportunity to do the same. Now, it may be a month from now that Brooks cannot provide the BNSF or whatever further information, but the better practice, and again, this is not a strict requirement, is that the projects move forward and ideally a decision is made on the same day at the same hearing. Because at that point, of course, everyone has had the same opportunity to provide whatever information they can provide.
Yeah, and I had more in mind looking at the existing record as opposed to asking for additional information. So I was not asking to add to the record. I was asking to.
I see, and that is so. If it's a
which is different.
Absolutely. Okay. So now I understand. So we're not seeking. So if I understand the
and
Vice
if I
Chair,
said something that suggested that was not my intent.
Understood.
Okay.
Understood.
Right.
So that is a different scenario. If it's a contemplation of information already provided, the door has closed as to more information. Again, that's something that the commission could do, and I think that is a reasonable approach if the commission decides to go that route.
Mr. Simpson, go ahead.
And I believe, as Vice Chair Van Brocklin explained earlier, there has been a differentiation amongst the two regarding a particular document. So, in essence, of apples to apples, there is a distinction there that are grounds, I would say, to consider additional process given the documents that have been submitted as of today.
So would it be fair to characterize that as, so with all due respect to one particular project, not being able to have that commitment from and clarity around clear service approval and a commitment from rail, that essentially I can't really get to the rate viability because we haven't been able to talk rates on either of the projects because neither of the projects were the one. So if we were to indicate that one of the projects we had the intent to award, should they be able to provide rates that prove viability, does that throw us into I want to use the word contingent, but I again would go back to, I mean, we have a project that is zoned appropriately, one is not. I mean, there are other compounding factors that make one readiness, which readiness is I mean, that's obviously not on the list, but readiness is important. These are public funds that need to get into service. So I'm trying to get us, I feel we have a responsibility to give as much clarity and make as much of a decision we can today. Although additional information has come in today, we've had an opportunity to review that, and I wouldn't say that it is of such a nature that it is course changing for where we are. So,
so I think here this is what I've been struggling with. Both applicants are saying we can't get you more information because you haven't selected us yet. So we have a horse and cart problem here, and that we can't have the kind of conversations with the shippers and their rail companies that we want to have because they want to know whether we're going to be funded. So you need to fund us in order for us to tell you the answers. Unless there were just one of us, right? Because if then you're talking about one project on the west side. They would then, at that point, presumably be able to get more data. But then you run into Sam's problem, which is then are we? We're, and I think there are legitimate distinctions here. But are we then, by then going, in this case, Millersburg going to the railroads, for example, or the shippers, are we somehow advantaging them in some way that is unfair to Brooks, which I would not want to do? So then, if that's true, then I think the question becomes, Bonnie's here to save the day. Then I think that if it is going to be unfair, then I'm for a fair approach to this. I'm trying to narrow to a decision, though, and if we keep hearing that, well, we can't give you that because there are two of us competing, and you have to select one of us to get there, and we're not getting the information we need in order to feel more confident about making the decision. Information we now have from a third applicant, and we just acted on. So it's not like we're incapable of approving projects. We just did that.
So then maybe if we were to take that a little bit.
So that's what I need help here on is procedurally, Treasure Valley has maybe nothing they created. It's just that they had the circumstance of being the lone applicant for the Treasure Valley project, and here we have two applicants, and say we want to be fair to the applicants. We also want we want to get the information to potentially approve one, because we can't approve two.
Right. And Vice Chair, Madam, so the conceptually, that makes sense. I think that what the commission can do, it can approve a project, right? And we've already discussed this milestone concept, right? There's going to be additional paper obstacles for any of these projects going forward, be that Treasure Valley or Millersburg or what have you, post approval, post agreement entry. Okay, so for example, my understanding at this point is that a fully executed agreement between the sponsor and a terminal operator, it's not going to happen until there's an award. So that's an example of something that's a paper obstacle that's going to happen post-award, post-agreement. What the commission is tasked with today is deciding whether there is what is the feasibility of these projects based on the information provided to date. So there are certainly going to be post-agreement conditions and what we've been calling milestones or phase gates, absolutely. But the commission, whether it's today or whether it's next month, has to make a call to say, based on everything we've got, the information's in the door, this project is feasible and worthy of approval under the legislation and as part, of course, the commission's public trust with these funds. So I wish there was one simple right answer. I don't think I really just gave it, but that is what we envision the commission's task today as being.
So let me ask it this way. If we were to have, let's say that both projects had a commitment from the rail and have similar rates to where we find that those two questions are answered very similarly. Are there other reasons that we would separate one project from another in terms of likelihood for success and ability to, and viability going forward? And maybe that takes this question of, I can't get you more information because you haven't approved us, we are not the one. Does it maybe sort through the two projects to say, even if those rates came back and both were exactly the same, and the rail answer was exactly the same, are there other reasons that we would move one project forward or not?
Well, I guess I would say, but we don't have that situation in my view.
Okay.
We have one that is, I think, somewhat stronger than the other. So we could approve that project today, and that would put us on. We've received all the information. We're making a choice. Exactly what Sam said. That might be cleaner than, I think what we're hearing from staff and from our lawyers is that would be cleaner, and I agree it would be cleaner.
But I want to
Then
make
you
sure,
get to the question of, can we get there as a commission on Millersburg or not? And I don't know what you guys think. I don't know what you think. Maybe we should quit talking and let them talk.
Commissioner, go right ahead.
I believe there is somewhat better viability for the Millersburg project. However, I still have real concerns about the overall economic viability of that project not having to end up being subsidized in some way, whether it's by the county or state or whoever. I just don't think the data supports it at this point.
Other comments? So the data is the record today, or is that with the going forward with allowing the negotiation of the additional information that would be able to secure a contract?
The data as of today.
Right.
And I understand there could be an opportunity to get additional data that would support it.
Right.
But I'm afraid that, as Bob said, as Vice Commissioner Van Brocklin, the railroads aren't going to talk to anybody until they know that you got a done deal and they can move ahead, and they're going to give you rates and talk about schedules and everything else.
But
They're
right.
playing their own game,
Right.
frankly.
So I guess what I would hate to do is not have an investment made based on that we couldn't break that seal. Are there other reasons that this project or the other project would make sense to go forward with those questions that still remain to be answered?
There's absolutely no doubt that there needs to be some type of an intermodal facility somewhere in the Willamette Valley. I'm not going to say mid-Willamette Valley, but I think a lot of the data that points to where we are right now doesn't support the ability of rail to compete with truck. To me, that's what I'm seeing in the data.
Okay. So other comments or questions?
Then I agree with you, and I think that that's where my hangup has been with this project also, is that in order to, when you look at the economics of being able to build that out, but that's not part of this project. Just looking at this project, you're talking about competing with trucks, are you gonna get there? And is it gonna be viable? And I don't think that question has been answered. And a part of it is the rates, because it's an unknown factor. And so then it comes to risk. And are we willing to risk $25 million of taxpayer dollars to do this project? And if we're wrong, what's the result?
And Madam Chair, like we talked about with Treasure Valley, back to Commissioner Brown's point about risk. I mean, that's one of the reasons we did talk about developing the IGA in that incremental fashion. Doesn't eliminate all risk. I'm not sure anything would ever eliminate all risk. But if the commission is really trying to find a way to support one of these projects moving forward while managing that risk, that might be the approach to take to get to a decision for a project plan, and then make sure we get to those detailed information pieces. One of the things that we did flag in our framework around this is get the actual numbers. When you do get to that point, again, before you build a $20-some million facility or even spend a bunch of money on right away, get all the design, get all those things figured out, and then let's do one final check and let's make sure those numbers come back. That could be a way to do it. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it. I'm just trying to figure out how we can maybe move, if there's really a desire to move something forward in the Mid-Valley, then I think where we're hearing from legal counsel, get to some decision to approve a specific project plan, and then maybe enter into this incremental approach where we can gather that information. I think the challenge with any other approach besides the legal challenges, back to Vice Chair Van Brocken's point, we're not going to get a lot better information until we do much more work and until we really do some of the design and negotiations. And I would call back to our early conversations in February with the Union Pacific. When we had their folks here, they kind of laid out their 10-step process. So they described all the kind of things they're going to have to go through before they're going to, really get down to real specifics into that structure, the rate structure, and even the service. We're close on service, but based upon how all that stuff comes about, it still might tweak a little bit.
So again, I go back to, if we had two projects that both answered, let's say that both answered number one exactly the same. Yes, they have a commitment, strong commitment, same letter maybe even. And then we also have two projects that have similar rates in their estimates, because neither one can go forward in terms of with clarity until we pick a project. Are there other reasons why we would move one over the other? I mean, because we can't answer that question today, and we can only answer it by picking a project or having no projects. So is there something else that makes one of them, and we've denied one, so are there compelling reasons why we would move the Millersburg project with those caveats that allow for those questions to be answered, and we again retain that authority to determine whether or not the information that is then subsequently submitted either does meet that criteria or not.
May I speak, Chair?
Please.
One of the things that's really bothering me is when we look at our idea of our draft milestones for the dedicated projects. And we have safety gates there that are set up for us as a commission to look at, do you meet this, and you get the money, then you move on to the next phase, et cetera. The problem with it is the timeline that's laid out is upside down for this project. And so some of these things for the scoping and planning, et cetera, and I don't want to go into detail, but it won't work. So for me, I'm concerned that if we say yes to the project, we're all in. It's there, where is the safety gates then at that point?
Madam Chair, so, part of the agreement conversation is, again, these milestones that provide for just that, milestones for the project as it moves forward. And this would be for Treasure Valley. Let's just take Treasure Valley because it's been approved. There is going to be an agreement that has milestones. Two of the biggest milestones will be acquisition of the property and construction commencement. But before either of those things happen, and again, this is based on our understanding and our rapid learning curve of the last few months, is there's going to be a number of paper obstacles, agreements to be signed, so on and so forth. So that will be built in. So the commission, whatever the sponsor, whatever the project, will have the opportunity to essentially weigh back in at these big, not at every single milestone because they get pretty granular, but at the big outlays of funds for, again, the two biggest obvious ones are acquisition, land acquisition, reimbursement of that, and commencement of construction. Those are two big red/green lights. So I just wanted to remind the commission of that.
And I believe also, Vice Chair Van Brockland, in your motion on Treasure Valley, you made it clear about the authority and role of the commission in approving those stage gates or phase gates, whatever we want to call them, milestones, to make sure that it passes the muster and expectations from the commission. That's how I interpreted your statement there.
And Madam Chair, I would just add one other point. To the extent that the commission believes that rates from the railroads are of paramount importance to know, the commission or the agreement can be structured so that those rates have to be reached or decided by a date certain, right? So it's not the can is kicked down the road indefinitely. Everybody agrees, here's a hard and fast date. Let's make it a reasonable one, but let's pick one, and then the party can come back with hopefully a confirmed rate from the railroad.
And thank you. I think you're helping to articulate what I'm not articulating very well, which is if that is the piece that we continue to question, are there enough compelling additional factors that would move this project forward, notwithstanding that information, and we then have the opportunity to determine that information within a specified period of time? It wouldn't be, I mean, what I'm trying to get at, is it just the rate that's holding one project from another? I would submit what I've heard stated, not necessarily. So I do hear distinction, and I'm trying to draw that out or not. I mean, if I'm misunderstanding.
Well, you've said that there's a distinction in terms of the zoning. That's true. That's a significant change. Now maybe the soils on this site, maybe the, exception opportunities that are available. I mean, you'd have to get into a discussion with the county and Brooks about what's possible on a land use basis, but it is a difference sitting here today. There's a difference in that one project's dealing with one railroad and the other project's dealing with three railroads. Those are two points of distinction.
There's also the additional roadway infrastructure issues on that one.
Okay.
Right. So there are differences.
So then, if the rate piece is, we have denied one project, we could go forward with allowing for the rate discussion within a specified period of time, but yet again, withholding the ability to then not move forward. So it would be the intention, but that information would need to satisfy the commission in terms of the viability, the economic viability with those rates.
Well, I don't want to.
Commissioner, that's where, oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner, that's where I think this is boiling down to now is you've already made an action on Brooks. So now the question is if you're wanting to keep Millersburg and move into that incremental approach in the IGA and approve the project plan, because we'll need to do that to enter into that step. The question I think comes still back to step one and step two, have they demonstrated that economic and shipper viability question? And we've had a little discussion here. And then that overall benefit to the state, is this a good investment? Do we feel good enough about this investment to enter into that agreement? And if the answer to both those are yes, then that might be the way to say, okay, we're moving this to approve a project plan, enter into the agreement phase, again, with those phase gates as best we can. Again, understanding Commissioner Brown, they're not perfect. There's still some risk, because once you enter into that, there is the hope that the project will come to fruition. So if there's really a lot of angst that this is a viable project with the information you have today, do you really want to enter into that contract or not? If you think that it is viable, given everything you had, even though there's some outstanding things, then maybe it's worth entering into that risk. And I think, Commissioner Brown, you nailed it. It's a risk assessment for the commission. And I think that's where you're kind of trying to wiggle, find your pathway through around that risk conversation.
But it wouldn't require additional funds to seek that information. It essentially, the risk is the time that we allow for, but we wouldn't essentially be saying it is a fully approved.
No, Madam Chair, my understanding of what the project sponsors are going to have to go through, they will need to do some additional work to get to that point. It's not just continued negotiating with the railroad. And again, I'm not the expert by any stretch, so I'm going off of what I heard from Union Pacific back in February, conversations I've had with Union Pacific, conversations that I think even Tioga might be able to weigh in on. They're not going to get to those rates until they get further along into the design process and understand how the layout is really going to work and get into those details. Even if you picked one, and we've heard from the project sponsors, picking one will help move it along, but they won't be able to just say, okay, we've been chosen, now we can get rates tomorrow. I don't think that's how the process works.
I do recognize that. I'm wondering, are we trying to get them beyond what we just approved for Treasure Valley? And the answer for me would be no. That I'm not expecting that they would then be able, because we're not requiring Treasure Valley to come back with specificity on those rates any more than what we just are hearing. We can't give you really anything other than a bit of a thumbnail sketch. So.
Well, Madam Chair, actually, the way I think we'll be looking at these agreements, we'll look at those phase gates pretty consistently, regardless what the project is. So back to getting those real rates and numbers, even for Treasure Valley, where we're close, we don't have actual numbers from them on rail car leases. I mean, we have ranges, but we'll, as they go forward, they start signing contracts, they're going to be closer and closer and closer.
Right.
And at the end of the day, we're going to go, here's the actual cost, here's the actual cost, here's the actual cost. You can start to add those up, and you really have the true cost comparison with actuals at the end. That's still one of the things we're talking about, even with Treasure Valley,
Yes.
that we want to make sure they go through.
But they did give us enough in order for us to say yes.
To say yes,
Yeah.
is it viable?
Yes.
And that's really the question for you.
Exactly.
And Madam Chair, there's a saying. So I'm from the South. That dog ain't gonna hunt, right?
Right.
So it's that's that's a very inelegant way to put it. But does the commission think that Millersburg is going to hunt?
Right.
One way or the
I
other.
love that statement. Yes. There's another one that I know of, but I'm not going to note it right now.
Commissioner Simpson, what's your viewpoint?
I've expressed it earlier, but I mean, at this point, I think there's sufficient information to, as I'd indicated earlier, to clearly identify a distinction amongst the two, and for me, it's just more about getting it out there and raising the question to all of us. so we can make a decision, because I think we can talk about this for about 10 more hours if we really wanted to.
I'd welcome a motion, which also would look like a life preserver.
So you're looking for a motion to approve Millersburg?
And Sam, can you help us with the motion?
Well, yeah, I think it'd be
It's the same
helpful.
It's the same motion as Treasure Valley. Should be
That's
In
no
a lot of
different.
regard, yes.
Sure. I think it's worth the exercise of just confirming that for purposes of approving, there's a prima facie approval or recognition that the three steps are okay, right? The decision matrix. I mean, the decision matrix, though, is a tool, and it's not even something that the commission has to adhere by. So you don't need to even really go there. But what is important is that if there is going to be an approval, that the rates be conditioned on getting those rates by a date certain. That date certain, you're not going to know right now, but that's something that we can discuss with, obviously, the department and the sponsor to determine whether or not what is a reasonable period for that. Is it 60 days? Is it 90 days?
So those rates could be, the deadline could be put in the agreement?
Correct.
Or in a side letter?
I think it would go in the agreement itself.
And then that agreement if I did a similar motion here,
We'll be back to you.
would come back to us.
Yep, right.
So would you want an outside date when you want it back to us? Or would we want an outside date when we want it back? I don't want to handcuff the negotiation.
I would be careful on a day right now, just because there's a lot of questions I think we'll need to work with the sponsor. I think Sam nailed that. I wish we had more information about how long this would really take. But
what I'm hearing
there's a
on
lot of process that is out of our control with Union Pacific too.
What I'm hearing on the commission is a split view, but it's not the first time that's happened on a board or commission. So, I said earlier I wasn't ready to approve, but given this discussion, but I'd be more comfortable if I have a little bit more time with the information. So,
I'm going to push us to a decision today. With all due respect, I really feel like we owe that. I wouldn't say that any of the information that has come in is of such a significant departure from, I think it just is, matter of fact, some of it is just a reiteration of what we'd already received. I don't mean that disrespectfully to the project sponsors, but it was really underscoring points to make sure that we understand them. So I don't want, but feel free to push back. My job is to get us from here to there. Do any other commission members feel that we should hold off on making a decision today? Okay. So I think we go forward. But if you don't feel prepared to make a motion, then if someone else feels that they would like to make a motion, I would welcome that.
no, I'll move it.
Okay.
All right, I move to approve the project plan for the Mid-Willamette Valley Intermodal Facility located at Millersburg, subject to the following conditions. The execution of an agreement with ODOT and approved by the OTC on terms and conditions acceptable to the department and the OTC. That the agreement shall include a project schedule with due dates and estimated costs for project milestones. The agreement shall further require that the project sponsor return to the commission for additional authorization to receive funds for project milestones, including the acquisition of the property upon which the facility will be constructed, commencement of facility construction, and other milestones which would be identified in the project agreement. no funds for either property acquisition or facility construction or from other actions requiring commission review and approval may be dispersed until the sponsor obtains such separate commission approval.
Madam Chair, if I may just interject, if, Vice Chair, I don't know if you want to add this to that motion, but a condition that the rate is obtained by a date certain.
Yes, and that a rate is obtained by?
I don't think we know at this point, but that it be negotiated and that be a condition of the agreement.
Okay, may be reasonably negotiated, and that report come back to the commission in 60 days. Let's say the September meeting on a progress report on that.
I think that's fine. We can bring the progress report. If it goes faster, great. If it's 60 days, we'll bring our progress report in 60 days.
Okay, excellent.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Again, thank you very much to the project sponsors. Thank you to the Department of Justice for walking alongside us. And thank you, Eric, personally to you. The amount of time, effort, and energy that you put into this, to our partners at Tioga, and to the team in general, just for helping us to get to where we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, is there anything else for the good of the order? We are adjourned. Oh, it's a boy!
You just
Yay!
aged me. You better not.